The envelope sat on Lily Carter's cot like a grenade waiting to detonate. 17 years of foster care had taught her one unshakable truth. Official mail never brought good news. Not once. Not ever. The return address read Patterson and Associates, Silver Creek, Wyoming, and her fingers traced the letters like they might burn through the paper and scar her skin. The afternoon light slanted through the window of the Riverton group home, painting gold stripes across the concrete floor. Somewhere down the hall, a television droned. Somewhere else, younger children argued over whose turn it was to use the computer. The sounds of institutional living. The soundtrack of a childhood measured in placements, in case files. Mia's small hand gripped Lily's sleeve. The 10-year-old had appeared silently, the way she always did when she sensed something important happening. 6 years of foster care had given her the instincts of a wild animal. She could read tension in a room before the adults even knew it existed. "Is it about Grandma Eleanor?" Lily's throat tightened at the question. Grandma Eleanor, the woman who had stood at the back of their parents' funeral when Lily was 9 years old, who had watched two orphan girls sob over closed caskets, and who had left before anyone could speak to her. The grandmother who had chosen silence over family, who had let the system swallow her only grandchildren rather than open her door. 6 years of nothing, not a phone call, not a birthday card, not a single indication that Eleanor Dawson remembered she had grandchildren at all. Lily tore the envelope open. The first line hit like a fist to the chest. Margaret Eleanor Dawson, deceased 3 months prior, had left her entire estate to Lily Marie Carter. 800 hectares of Wyoming ranch land, a trust fund worth $50,000. Full ownership effective on Lily's 18th birthday. 3 weeks away. The paper trembled in Lily's hands. She read the words again, then again. They refused to make sense. Her grandmother had ignored them for 6 years, had watched from whatever distance rich people kept from inconvenient relatives. And now this, an inheritance that sounded like a fairy tale. 800 hectares, she tried to picture it, failed. The largest space she had ever called her own was a shared bedroom in a group home, 12 feet by 12 feet, with a bunk bed and a dresser that didn't lock. Mia's shriek pierced the quiet. "Emmy, does this mean we get a real home?" The hope in her sister's voice was almost too much to bear. Lily had spent 6 years protecting that hope, shielding it from the constant disappointments of their lives. Every time they got placed with a new family, and Mia started to believe, Lily held her breath. Every time that placement fell apart, Lily was there to catch the pieces. Before she could answer, her cell phone rattled against the metal bed frame. Unknown number. Wyoming area code. She answered on the second ring. "Miss Carter, I'm David Reynolds. I was your grandmother's attorney. I assume you've received my letter." The man's voice carried the careful precision of someone delivering news he had already classified as complicated. Lily's pulse hammered in her ears, but she kept her voice steady. A skill learned from years of dealing with social workers and judges and foster parents who held her fate in their indifferent hands. "I just opened it. This can't be real." A pause stretched long enough to confirm her suspicion that nothing about this would be simple. "The will is legally sound. Your grandmother updated it 6 months before her death. However, we have a situation." The word situation landed with the weight of every broken promise Lily had collected since she was 11. She had learned to recognize that word. It meant something bad was coming, something that would snatch away whatever small hope had just been offered. "What kind of situation?" A man named Brandon Hayes filed a claim 48 hours after the funeral. He's presenting documentation that identifies him as Eleanor's grandson from a first marriage in the 1970s. He's claiming superior right to the estate. Lily's vision tunneled. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing inward. Mia's excited breathing filled the silence while Lily fought to keep her composure. "My grandmother never mentioned another grandchild. Not once. Not in any letter. Not in anything." "I'm aware," David Reynolds said. His tone carried the exhaustion of a man who had been fighting this battle for weeks without anyone to fight alongside. "But Mr. Hayes has what appears to be a birth certificate, letters, witness statements. He's already moved into the ranch house, changed the locks." The room tilted. Lily pressed her palm against the wall, feeling the familiar texture of institutional paint that had become the backdrop of her entire adolescence. How many walls like this had she leaned against? How many rooms had she packed up and left behind? "He's living there? In her house?" "I'm afraid so." Wyoming property law allows temporary possession when familial claims are disputed. The trust fund is locked in your name. He can't touch that. But the ranch itself is in probate limbo until a judge rules. A court battle could take 6 to 12 months. 6 to 12 months. Lily did the math automatically. In 6 months, she would age out of the foster care system. Mia would still have 8 years left. If Lily couldn't provide a stable home, the system would separate them. Different placements, different cities, maybe different states. They had survived 6 years together by fighting for every inch. Every caseworker meeting, every placement review. Every time someone suggested that separating them might be easier, Lily had dug in her heels and refused to let go. This ranch wasn't just an inheritance. It was their only chance to stay together. Mia tugged Lily's shirt, eyes wide with questions she couldn't voice. Lily covered the mouthpiece and whispered the only thing that mattered. Someone's trying to steal the ranch. The girl's face crumpled. 6 years of bouncing between foster homes crystallized in that expression. The learned expectation that good things always got taken away. That hope was just a setup for disappointment. Lily's jaw set. "Mr. Reynolds, when's the next bus to Silver Creek?" A longer pause. "Miss Carter, I understand your frustration, but showing up won't change the legal timeline. The preliminary hearing isn't scheduled for another 3 weeks. I'd advise waiting until—" Lily cut him off. "Mia has been in the system since she was 4 years old. I've kept us together through 7 different placements, 7 different schools. 7 times I had to convince someone in a suit that we were worth keeping together. I'm not going to sit in this group home for 3 weeks while some stranger sells off our inheritance piece by piece." The attorney's sigh carried the weight of a man who had seen this pattern before. Young people with more determination than resources, charging into battles they didn't understand. "I'll file an emergency motion to freeze the estate assets. But Miss Carter, be prepared. Mr. Hayes has an attorney too. He has money. He has possession. This won't be quick and it won't be easy." Lily ended the call. She pulled Mia into a fierce hug, feeling her sister's body shake with suppressed sobs. When Mia pulled back, her expression carried a familiar determination. They had been here before, standing at the edge of losing everything that mattered. The difference was that this time they had a destination. Claire Anderson found them 30 minutes later, stuffing clothes into the same duffel bags they had carried through 7 different placements. The social worker stood in the doorway, her face cycling through concern, resignation, and something that might have been admiration. Claire had been their caseworker for 2 years, long enough to know that Lily Carter didn't make decisions lightly. "Lily, you can't just leave. You're still a ward of the state for 3 more weeks." Lily zipped Mia's bag with more force than necessary. "My grandmother left us a ranch. We're going to claim it. And if you fail—" Claire's voice was gentle but firm. "Mia has 8 more years in the system. If you leave now and this falls apart, she could end up in a different home, maybe even a different county. I've seen it happen." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Lily had spent 6 years navigating the maze of foster care bureaucracy. She knew which rules could be bent and which ones would break you. She knew that Claire was right. Leaving now was a gamble. If the inheritance fell through, if this Brandon Hayes won his claim, she would lose everything, including her sister. She met Claire's eyes with the unflinching certainty of someone who had already decided the risk was worth taking. "I won't fail." Claire studied her for a long moment. Then she pulled a business card from her purse and scribbled something on the back. "This is my personal cell. When you get to Silver Creek, call me every 3 days. Miss one check-in and I'm legally obligated to report you as a runaway." Lily took the card, recognizing the gesture for what it was. A social worker breaking protocol because she had watched these 2 girls claw their way through a system designed to separate them. "Thank you. Don't thank me." Claire's voice cracked slightly. "Just keep her safe." The Greyhound station smelled like diesel and desperation. Lily counted out their bus fare twice, watching her entire savings from weekend jobs at the group home evaporate into 2 tickets. $127 left to their names. Everything they owned fit into 2 duffel bags. Mia pressed against the window as the bus pulled away from Riverton, watching the only home she had known for 6 years shrink into memory. The buildings grew smaller. The streets became lines. The town became a smudge on the horizon, and then nothing at all. The girl's voice came out small, almost lost under the engine's rumble. "What if he won't let us stay? What if Grandma Eleanor was wrong about us?" Lily wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders, pulling her close. The bus seat was worn and stained, but Mia fit perfectly against her side, like they were built to travel together. "Grandma Eleanor spent 6 years not calling us, not visiting, Not explaining why she chose a silent ranch over two kids who needed her, Lily paused, choosing her words carefully. I don't know why she changed her mind, but she did. And we're not going to let some stranger steal the only thing she left us. Mia's fingers found the worn edge of Lily's sleeve, the same nervous habit she had developed at 4 years old, when their parents' car had skidded off a mountain road and shattered their entire world. Will we have our own rooms? The question carried so much weight, it threatened to crack Lily's carefully maintained composure. 6 years of shared foster rooms. 6 years of whispering plans after lights out. 6 years of promising Mia that someday they would have a place that couldn't be taken away by a caseworker's signature. Yes, baby, our own rooms. Maybe even a dog and space to breathe. The landscape shifted outside the window. Industrial sprawl gave way to open rangeland as the bus climbed into the heart of Wyoming. Mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped even in late spring. Fences stretched for miles, marking property lines that had probably stood longer than Lily had been alive. This was ranching country, the kind of place where land meant legacy, where families measured their history in acres and generations, where a man's word still meant something and a handshake could seal a deal. Mia fell asleep somewhere past Lander, her head heavy against Lily's shoulder. Lily stared out at the endless horizon and tried to reconcile the grandmother she had never known with the woman who had apparently planned this inheritance 6 months before her death. Why wait? Why not reach out while she was still alive? Why give them a legacy but never give them a chance to say goodbye? The questions circled like vultures, but Lily pushed them aside. The past was gone. Her grandmother was buried in soil she had never seen. The only thing that mattered now was the future waiting in Silver Creek, locked behind doors that some stranger had changed. The bus dropped them at a depot that barely qualified as a building. More of a covered bench with a faded schedule board and a trash can overflowing with fast food wrappers. Silver Creek sprawled before them, population 2,500 according to the sign, with a main street that looked lifted from a postcard of small-town America. Feed store, diner, hardware shop, courthouse with its inevitable Bronze War memorial. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where newcomers stuck out like neon signs, where two foster kids from Riverton would be marked as outsiders before they spoke a single word. Mia's hand found Lily's automatically as they walked down Main Street. The afternoon sun baked the asphalt, and the smell of hay and diesel hung thick in the air. Pickup trucks lined the curbs, more common than cars. Men in work boots and dusty jeans moved with the unhurried purpose of people who had nowhere else to be. A few locals glanced their way, curious but not hostile. Not yet. The Silver Creek Feed and Supply occupied a corner lot with trucks parked at angles that suggested no one here worried much about traffic laws. Lily pushed through the door, triggering a bell that announced their arrival to a clerk restocking shelves. "Help you girls?" The man was 60 at least, with hands that looked like they had been carved from the same wood as the feed store counter. His eyes were kind but cautious, the eyes of someone who had seen enough strangers pass through to know that not all of them meant well. Lily's mouth felt dry, her prepared speech evaporating under the clerk's patient scrutiny. "We're looking for directions to Dawson Ranch." The man's expression shifted, recognition followed by something that might have been sympathy. "You must be Eleanor's granddaughters." Before Lily could respond, the door opened behind them. The man who entered carried himself with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to justify his presence anywhere. Early 30s, expensive boots that had never seen real work, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He stopped when he saw them, and Lily watched calculation flicker across his face, the look of a predator spotting prey he hadn't expected. His voice carried across the store loud enough to turn every head. "Dawson Ranch? That's my property now, sweetheart." Lily's spine went rigid. Mia's grip on her hand tightened to the point of pain. The girl pressed closer to her sister's side, her body tensing with the instinctive fear of a child who had learned to recognize danger in adult voices. The man stepped closer, studying them with the detached interest of someone examining livestock at auction. "You must be the foster kids trying to steal my inheritance." The store went quiet. The clerk froze mid-motion, a bag of feed suspended in his hands. Two customers near the back shelves turned to watch, their conversation dying mid-sentence. Lily felt Mia trembling, but she forced herself to hold the stranger's gaze. She had faced down worse. Foster parents who screamed, caseworkers who threatened, judges who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be helped. This man with his expensive boots and his predator's smile didn't scare her. He made her angry. Her voice came out steady despite the fury building in her chest. I'm Lily Carter. This is my sister Mia. Our grandmother Eleanor left us the ranch. The man's laugh held no warmth, only contempt sharpened to a cutting edge. Your grandmother? That's rich. His voice dripped with mock sympathy. Eleanor Dawson was my grandmother, from her first marriage in the 70s. You know, before she married your drunk failure of a grandfather. The words hit like physical blows. Mia made a small sound, hurt and confusion wrapped into a single wounded note. Lily stepped between her sister and this man who had just turned their grandmother into a weapon. You need to back off. Brandon Hayes, because of course this was Brandon Hayes, the thief wearing expensive boots and a legal smile, tilted his head as if considering her demand, then dismissed it with a shrug. Your daddy was a drunk and a failure. That's why he left Silver Creek and never came back. That's why Eleanor cut ties with him. She was ashamed. The store felt too small, too hot. Lily's pulse hammered in her ears, but she kept her voice level. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. You don't know anything about my father. Brandon's smile widened, feeding on their visible distress. I know Eleanor talked about him exactly once in 40 years. Called him the biggest disappointment of her life. Said she'd rather leave the ranch to a stranger than watch him drink it into the ground. He stepped closer, close enough that Lily could smell his cologne. Expensive, like his boots, like everything about him. She left it to me, her real family, the grandson she actually chose. You girls need to go back to your group home where you belong. This town doesn't want you. Nobody wants you. Mia's sob broke through Lily's control. The girl buried her face against Lily's side, shoulders shaking. All the hope that had built during the bus ride, all the dreams of yellow bedrooms and dogs and space to breathe, crumbling under the weight of this stranger's cruelty. Lily wrapped an arm around Mia, pulling her close while maintaining eye contact with Brandon. This isn't over. Brandon's expression shifted to something almost pitying. Yes, it is, kid. You're 17 with no money and no lawyer. I've got possession, legal documentation, and Eleanor's attorney on retainer. Go home, save yourself the heartbreak. He turned and walked out, the door chiming cheerfully behind him as if nothing had shattered. The store remained frozen, customers uncertain whether to pretend they hadn't witnessed the confrontation or offer comfort to two girls who clearly had no idea what they had walked into. A woman's voice cut through the uncomfortable silence. Don't listen to that snake. Lily turned to find a woman in her 60s standing near the seed display, work-worn hands clenched into fists. Her face carried the weathered beauty of someone who had spent decades under Wyoming sun, and her eyes held a fury that matched Lily's own. That man is a liar. The woman stepped forward, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had started to protest years of physical labor. I've known Eleanor Dawson for 40 years, worked her ranch every summer until arthritis made me retire. She never mentioned a grandson named Brandon, not once, but she talked about you girls constantly. Lily felt Mia lift her head, hope warring with the damage Brandon's words had inflicted. The woman's gaze moved between them with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in years. Really seen. Not as case numbers or problems or inconveniences, but as people. You've got your father's eyes. Both of you. Robert was a good man. Whatever Brandon Hayes said about him is poison. Mia's voice came out small but desperate. You knew our dad? Knew your whole family, child. The woman extended her hand to Lily. I'm Grace Sullivan. I live about 5 miles from Dawson Ranch, what used to be my family's ranch before I lost it 20 years ago. Something dark flickered across Grace's expression, gone before Lily could identify it, but leaving traces like smoke after a fire. Come with me, both of you. We need to talk. Grace's truck had seen better decades. The paint had faded from whatever color it had originally been to a dusty gray that matched the Wyoming landscape. The seats were patched with duct tape. The dashboard held a permanent layer of dust that no amount of cleaning would ever fully remove. But it started on the first try, and it carried them away from Silver Creek's main street with the efficiency of someone who knew every pothole and shortcut. Mia sat between Lily and Grace, still wiping tears but listening intently, her natural curiosity fighting against the hurt Brandon had inflicted. Grace drove with one hand on the wheel, her eyes scanning the road with the automatic vigilance of someone who had spent a lifetime watching for obstacles. Eleanor kept your school photos in a shoebox on her kitchen shelf. Updated it every year. Don't know how she got them, but she did. Lily's chest tightened. She bragged about you making honor roll, Grace continued. Said you'd switched schools 5 times in 3 years and still managed better grades than most kids who never moved. Worried about Mia every time I visited. Said the system wasn't built for sensitive kids. Said you were probably protecting your sister from things no 10-year-old should have to handle. Mia looked up at Lily, eyes wide. Lily couldn't speak. All those years of silence. All those times she had wondered if their grandmother even remembered their names. And apparently Eleanor had been tracking them, caring from a distance, building some kind of understanding that she had never bothered to share. Why didn't she reach out? Lily finally managed. Why didn't she come get us after the accident? Grace's jaw tightened. Her knuckles went white on the steering wheel. Your father and Eleanor had a fight in 1995, big enough that Robert left and didn't come back until you were born. I don't know all the details. Eleanor wouldn't talk about it, but whatever happened broke something between them. The truck bounced over a rut in the road. Dust swirled outside the windows. She loved you girls, but she was too proud or too scared to bridge that gap while Robert was alive. After he died, Grace trailed off, shaking her head. I think the guilt paralyzed her. She couldn't face what she'd done by staying away, so she just kept staying away. Watching from a distance because getting closer meant admitting she'd been wrong. Mia's voice came out small, wounded. So she just watched us from far away while we got shuffled through foster homes while Lily had to fight to keep us together? Grace reached over and squeezed Mia's hand. Sometimes pride and fear look a lot like cruelty, child. Doesn't make it right. But she did try to make it right at the end. 6 months before her heart gave out, she updated her will, made sure every single asset went to you two, the ranch, the trust fund, everything. She pulled off the main road onto a gravel path that wound through stands of cottonwood trees. The truck rattled and shook, but Grace navigated with the confidence of someone who had driven this route 1,000 times. I'm taking you to an overlook. You should see what you're fighting for before you decide if it's worth the battle. The truck climbed a gentle rise, emerging at a clearing that looked out over a valley carved by centuries of water and wind. Lily's breath caught in her chest. Dawson Ranch sprawled below them. 800 hectares of rolling pasture, cottonwood groves, weathered outbuildings, and a 2-story farmhouse that looked like it had grown out of the land itself rather than been built on top of it. Fences marked paddocks and grazing areas. A red barn stood solid against the afternoon light. Equipment sheds clustered near the house like chicks around a hen. In the distance, cattle moved as dark shapes against the green. It was everything Lily had ever dreamed of. Everything she had whispered to Mia after lights out in a dozen different foster homes. Space. Permanence. A place that couldn't be taken away by paperwork and bureaucracy. But even from this distance, she could see the silver truck parked in the driveway. Lights glowed in the house windows. Someone else's lights in their grandmother's home. Mia pressed against the window, breath fogging the glass. It's so big, Emmy. That's really ours? Lily couldn't speak past the emotion closing her throat. Grace's voice carried a sharp edge. Brandon Hayes showed up 2 days after Eleanor's funeral, had a moving truck and legal papers before the body was even cold. He's been selling off her belongings piece by piece. Antiques, furniture, tools. Your grandmother collected those things over 60 years. He's treating them like inventory. Lily's chest ached with a fury so intense it felt like drowning. Can he do that? Just sell everything? Property law's murky when there's a contested will. Grace's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Until a judge rules, Brandon can claim he's liquidating assets as the rightful heir. By the time the case gets to court, there might not be anything left except the land itself. She turned to face Lily directly. Her expression hardened with old pain. I know how this goes. 20 years ago, I lost my family's ranch to a con man who used almost the same playbook. Forged documents, smooth talk, and a legal system that moved too slow to stop him. Lily studied Grace's profile, seeing something beneath the weathered exterior that explained the immediate alliance. This woman wasn't just helping out of kindness. She had her own score to settle. What was his name? The man who took your ranch? Grace's voice went flat, cold. The voice of someone speaking about a wound that had never fully healed. Marcus Webb. He posed as an irrigation consultant, took a $30,000 deposit from my father, and disappeared with forged papers. By the time our lawyer realized what happened, Marcus was gone. My father had a heart attack 6 months later. We lost the ranch to foreclosure. Mia's hand found Grace's arm, the girl's instinct for recognizing pain sharp despite her age. I'm sorry that happened to you. Grace covered Mia's hand with her own, blinking against tears that didn't quite fall. I spent 20 years looking for Marcus Webb, never found him, but I'm not going to watch another family lose their land to wolves like Brandon Hayes. She looked at Lily with an intensity that felt like a challenge. You girls have a place to stay tonight. I've got a spare room and more opinions than good sense. We're going to figure out how to fight this. Lily shook her head automatically, the instinct of someone who had learned not to accept help without knowing its price. We used most of our money for bus tickets. We can't pay you back. Grace's laugh was short and sharp. Child, I'm not asking for payment. I'm asking for the chance to see justice done. You fight for your ranch, I get to watch Brandon Hayes lose. That's payment enough. Grace's house sat on 10 acres of scraped-together land. What was left after the bank took everything else. The trailer had been reinforced with an addition that spoke to decades of making do with limited resources. The walls were sturdy but mismatched. The roof had been patched in 3 different colors. A vegetable garden grew in neat rows along one side, and chickens pecked at the dirt near a hand-built coop. Inside smelled like coffee and wood smoke. Family photos lined every available surface. Most showed a younger Grace with a man Lily assumed was her late husband, but one frame held a faded picture of a different ranch. Larger, more prosperous. Lost. Grace set them up in a room that had clearly been waiting for visitors who rarely came. 2 twin beds, clean sheets, a window that looked out toward where Dawson Ranch lay hidden by distance and darkness. Mia collapsed onto one bed, exhaustion finally overtaking the emotional upheaval of the day. Her eyes were already closing. Emmy, her voice was thick with sleep. We're going to get it back, right? The ranch. We're going to win. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, brushing hair from her sister's forehead. Yes, baby, we're going to win. Mia's breathing evened out within minutes. The deep sleep of a child who had finally found a safe place to rest. Lily moved to the window, staring into the night as if she could see through miles in darkness. To the house that should have been theirs. Grace appeared beside her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. Your grandmother used to stand at her kitchen window the same way, looking out at the land like she was checking it was still there, like she was afraid it might disappear if she looked away too long. Lily accepted the coffee, grateful for the warmth against her hands. The night had turned cold, the way Wyoming nights did even in late spring. Mr. Reynolds, the attorney, said this could take 6 to 12 months to resolve in court. We don't have that kind of time. Mia needs stability now, not eventually. Grace sipped her coffee, her eyes fixed on the same darkness Lily was watching. Then we don't wait for the courts to move. We prove Brandon Hayes is a fraud before he can liquidate everything. How? He's living in the house. He's changed the locks. We can't exactly walk in and start investigating. Grace's smile carried edges sharp enough for the cut. Your grandmother gave me a key years ago for emergencies. She paused, letting the implications settle. I'd say this qualifies. Lily turned to look at her. This woman who had lost her own ranch to a con man 20 years ago, who had spent 2 decades looking for justice and never finding it, who was now offering to help 2 girls she had just met break into a house that legally belonged to someone else. Why are you helping us? Really? Grace was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 20 years of grief. Because I know what it feels like to watch someone steal your legacy while the law moves too slow to stop them. Because your grandmother was my friend, and she would want someone looking out for you. And because she turned to face Lily directly. Because I spent 20 years feeling helpless. Watching that con man's face in my memory every single day and knowing he was out there somewhere, living free while my father died of a broken heart. Her jaw tightened. I can't change what happened to me, but I can help you, and maybe that's close enough to justice to let me sleep at night. Lily looked back into the window, at the darkness hiding 800 hectares of land her grandmother had protected for 60 years. Land that some stranger was now picking apart like a vulture on a carcass. She thought about her father, the man Brandon Hayes had called a drunk and a failure. The man who had left this town and never talked about why. The man who had died on a mountain road when Lily was 9 years old, leaving 2 daughters to navigate a world that didn't want them. She thought about Eleanor, the grandmother who had watched from a distance, who had tracked their school photos and worried about their placements, but never once picked up the phone, who had tried to make amends at the end with a will that might not even survive a legal challenge. She thought about Mia, sleeping in the next room, dreaming about yellow bedrooms and teas and a place to finally call home. Tomorrow, Lily said. We start tomorrow. Grace nodded, her eyes glinting with the determination of someone who had been waiting 20 years for a fight. Tomorrow. The word hung in the air like a promise. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved across the land, carrying the smell of sage and cattle and the distant memory of snow. The same wind that had blown across these plains for thousands of years, before the ranchers, before the settlers, before anyone had drawn lines on a map and called the land their own. The land didn't care who owned it. It only cared who was willing to fight for it. Lily stayed at the window long after Grace had gone to bed. She watched the stars emerge one by one, filling the Wyoming sky with a brightness she had never seen in the city. No light pollution here, no buildings blocking the horizon, just endless sky and endless land and the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about the bus ride, about Mia's face when she read the letter, about the hope that had bloomed in her sister's eyes, fragile as a flower in late frost. She thought about Brandon Hayes, his expensive boots and his predator's smile, the way he had said your daddy was a drunk and a failure like he was stating a simple fact, like he had the right to reduce Robert Carter to a single word. Failure. Lily had only 9 years of memories with her father, 9 years before the accident took him away. But in those 9 years, she had never once seen him fail at anything that mattered. He had taught her to ride a bike on a Saturday afternoon, running alongside her until she found her balance. He had read her stories every night, doing different voices for each character until she laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. He had held her when she cried about the kids at school who made fun of her secondhand clothes. And he had told her that the measure of a person wasn't what they wore, but what they did. That wasn't failure. That was love. Whatever had happened between her father and Eleanor, whatever had driven him from this town and kept him away for years, it didn't erase who he had been to his daughters. It didn't make Brandon Hayes' words true. Lily clenched her fists against the windowsill. She would prove Brandon wrong. She would prove them all wrong, every caseworker who had looked at her file and seen a statistic. Every foster parent who had treated her like a temporary inconvenience. Every judge who had questioned whether a 17-year-old could really keep her sister safe. She would claim this ranch, she would build a home, and she would make sure that Mia never had to wonder again whether good things could last. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows of Grace's trailer. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound was lonely and wild and somehow comforting. A reminder that this land had survived worse than con men and contested wills. It would survive Brandon Hayes too. Lily finally turned from the window and climbed into the second twin bed. The sheets smelled like lavender and sunshine. The mattress was softer than anything she had slept on in years. She closed her eyes and listened to Mia's steady breathing across the room. Tomorrow they would start fighting. Tonight they would rest. And somewhere out there in a house that should have been theirs, Brandon Hayes was sleeping in Eleanor Dawson's bed, surrounded by Eleanor Dawson's things, planning to sell Eleanor Dawson's legacy to the highest bidder. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that 2 girls from a group home in Riverton had already survived more than he could imagine, that they had already beaten odds that should have crushed them, that they had already learned the most important lesson the foster care system could teach. When you have nothing left to lose, you fight with everything you have. And Lily Carter had everything to fight for. Her sister, her future, her father's memory, her grandmother's land. She fell asleep with her fists still clenched, ready for the battle to come. The Wyoming night wrapped around the trailer like a blanket, cold and dark and full of stars. The wind carried the smell of sage across the empty miles. The cattle settled in their pastures. The coyotes sang their ancient songs. And in Silver Creek, a war was about to begin. Morning came to Grace Sullivan's trailer like a slow awakening. Gray light filtered through curtains that had faded from years of Wyoming sun. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, rich and dark and promising. Somewhere outside, a rooster announced the dawn with the kind of authority that suggested he had been doing this for years and would continue long after everyone listening had turned to dust. Lily opened her eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The disorientation was familiar. 7 foster homes in 6 years had taught her body to wake confused, to spend those first seconds cataloging her surroundings before memory caught up with consciousness. Then she remembered Wyoming, Silver Creek, the inheritance, Brandon Hayes with his expensive boots and his poison smile. The ranch. She turned her head and saw Mia still sleeping in the other twin bed. Her sister's face was peaceful in a way it rarely was during waking hours. No worry lines, no watchful tension, just a 10-year-old girl dreaming about yellow bedrooms and dogs and all the things she had been promised but never received. Lily slipped out of bed without making a sound. She found Grace in the kitchen, standing at a window that looked east toward where the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The older woman held a coffee mug in both hands, steam rising around her weathered face. She didn't turn around when Lily entered. Your grandmother used to watch the sunrise every morning. Said it reminded her that every day was a chance to do better than the day before. Lily accepted the mug Grace handed her without looking. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot, and it was real, and it anchored her to the moment. Did she do better? Grace was quiet for a long time. She tried. At the end, she tried. Whether that's enough is something you'll have to decide for yourself. They stood in silence, watching the sun climb higher. The light transformed the landscape from shadow to substance, revealing the bones of Grace's 10 remaining acres. The vegetable garden, the chicken coop, the patches where grass grew thin from years of trying to coax life from soil that had been pushed too hard. This was all that remained of a family's legacy. 10 acres from hundreds, a trailer instead of a farmhouse, chickens instead of cattle. Grace spoke without prompting, as if she had been waiting years for someone to tell this story to. My family came to Wyoming in 1892. 4 generations of Sullivans worked that land, built it up from nothing, survived droughts and depressions and everything else God and nature could throw at us. She set down her coffee mug with more force than necessary. Then Marcus Webb showed up. The name landed in the quiet kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. He came in 1998, dressed like money, talked like a friend, said he was an irrigation consultant, that he could increase our water efficiency by 40%. My father was desperate. We'd had 3 bad years in a row. Cattle prices were down, feed costs were up. He saw Marcus Webb as salvation. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the counter. Marcus took a $30,000 deposit, said he needed it for equipment and permits, gave us contracts that looked official, had letterhead from a company that didn't exist, and references from people who were probably paid to lie. What happened? He disappeared. Grace's voice went flat, cold. The voice of someone describing a wound that had never healed. Took our money and vanished like smoke. By the time we realized what had happened, he was gone. No forwarding address, no paper trail, nothing. She turned to face Lily directly. My father never recovered. He blamed himself for trusting the wrong man. 6 months after Marcus disappeared, his heart gave out. We couldn't keep up with the loans he'd taken trying to save the ranch. Bank foreclosed, everything my family built for 100 years, gone. Lily understood then why Grace had offered to help. This wasn't charity, this was war. A war that had been waiting 20 years for a battlefield. You think Marcus Webb is connected to Brandon Hayes? It wasn't a question. Grace's eyes narrowed. I don't believe in coincidences. A con man targets your grandmother's ranch using forged documents and smooth talk? Same playbook Marcus used on my family. Either Brandon learned from the same teacher, or Marcus is still out there, still hunting. The thought settled into Lily's chest like ice. We need to find out, she said. We need proof. Grace nodded slowly. There's someone you should meet first. Someone who knew your grandmother better than anyone. Someone who might be able to help us understand what we're really fighting against. Frank Mitchell's cabin sat on the eastern edge of Dawson Ranch like a sentinel watching over the land. The structure was small but solid, built from logs that had weathered to silver gray over decades of exposure to Wyoming's brutal seasons. A stone chimney rose from one end, and smoke drifted from it in lazy spirals that dissolved into the morning sky. The man who emerged as Grace's truck pulled up carried himself with military precision, despite being well into his 60s. Silver crew cut, back straight as a rifle barrel. Hands that looked like they had been forged from the same iron as the tools hanging in his workshop. His eyes found Lily immediately, assessed her with the careful attention of someone trained to identify threats and opportunities in equal measure. You're late. Grace checked her watch, by 3 minutes. If you're going to fight Brandon Hayes, you can't afford to be late by 3 seconds. His voice carried the gravel of a lifetime spent giving orders and expecting them to be followed. He didn't move from his position on the porch, forcing them to approach him rather than meeting them halfway. Lily felt herself being measured, weighed, found wanting before she had spoken a single word. Frank Mitchell continued without waiting for a response. You think you can run 800 hectares? You're 17. Probably never worked a ranch in your life. Don't know the difference between a heifer and a steer. Couldn't tell me what month to move cattle to summer pasture or how much hay you need to get through a hard winter. Lily's spine straightened. The instinct to defend herself rose like fire in her chest. I've kept my sister and myself alive through 6 years of foster care. 7 different placements. 7 different schools. Every time someone tried to separate us, I fought. Every caseworker meeting. Every court date. Every time some stranger in a suit decided they knew what was best for us. She held his gaze without flinching. I can learn ranching. I've learned harder things. Frank's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of recognition. The look of a man who had seen enough of the world to know that strength came in forms that couldn't always be measured. He was quiet for a long moment. My son David learned to ride his first horse on this ranch. Your grandmother taught him. He was 10 years old, same age as your sister. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. David enlisted right out of high school, wanted to serve his country the way I had, did 2 tours in Iraq, started a 3rd in Afghanistan. Frank's jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck stood out like cables. He didn't come home from that 3rd tour. Lily understood then. The hardness in this man's eyes wasn't cruelty. It was grief compressed into something that could still function, still work, still face each day without breaking apart. She knew that kind of grief. She had carried her own version of it since she was 9 years old. I'm sorry. Frank nodded once, sharp and brief. Your grandmother was good to David. Treated him like a grandson when his own grandparents were gone. After he died, I stayed on the ranch because leaving felt like abandoning his memory. He stepped down from the porch, closing the distance between them. Eleanor made me promise something before she passed, said if anything happened, I should help Robert's daughters. Said you'd need someone who knew the land better than the law. Will you help us? Frank studied her for another long moment. Then he looked at Mia, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes from beside the truck. The girl met his gaze without fear. There was something in her expression that seemed to catch him off guard. A directness that belonged to someone much older. My sister is the smartest person I know. Mia's voice carried across the space between them. She's been taking care of me since she was 11. She can do anything. Frank's expression cracked. Just slightly. Just enough to reveal the human being beneath the soldier's armor. He turned back to Lily. I'll teach you what you need to know. But teaching takes time. Right now, Brandon Hayes is selling off your grandmother's legacy piece by piece. We need to stop the bleeding before we worry about long-term education. He gestured toward Grace. Tell her about the antique barn. Grace stepped forward, her earlier reticence replaced by tactical focus. Eleanor had beautiful things, antiques she'd collected over 60 years. Furniture, silver, tools that belonged to her grandfather. Brandon's been selling them all over the county. Quick sales, cash deals, no questions asked. Frank pulled a phone from his pocket. The device looked out of place in his calloused hands, like a piece of modern technology that had accidentally traveled back in time. I photographed everything in Eleanor's house before she died, made an inventory for insurance purposes. If Brandon's selling her things, we'll be able to identify them. And if we can prove he's liquidating assets before the will is settled, we can use that against him in court. Lily felt the first spark of hope she had allowed herself since arriving in Silver Creek. They had a plan. They had allies. They had something to fight with. Now they just needed proof. The Silver Creek antique barn occupied a converted feed store on the edge of town. Dust motes swirled in the light filtering through grimy windows. The interior smelled of old wood and furniture polish, and the accumulated memory of objects that had outlived their original owners. Lily pushed through the door with Grace at her side. Frank had stayed at his cabin with Mia, beginning the girls' education in ranch basics while the adults handled the investigation. The proprietor looked up from a ledger. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose and the patient expression of someone who had learned to wait for customers rather than chase them. Help you, ladies? Grace took the lead, her voice carrying the casual friendliness of a longtime local. Afternoon, Beth. I heard you bought some items from the Dawson estate. Beth's expression shifted to something cautious, the wariness of a businesswoman who sensed she might be walking into a situation with legal implications. News travels fast. Small town. We're just curious what pieces Brandon Hayes brought in. Eleanor was a friend. I'd hate to see her things get lost to strangers. The woman hesitated. Her eyes moved between Grace and Lily, calculating risks and loyalties. Lily stepped forward. She pulled out her driver's license and the letter from David Reynolds. I'm Lily Carter, Eleanor's granddaughter. Brandon Hayes is contesting my inheritance. I'm trying to document what he sold. Beth's face softened with recognition, the hard edges of business caution giving way to something more human. I heard about the will dispute. Everyone in town's been talking about it. Most folks don't believe Brandon's story, if that helps. Eleanor never mentioned any grandson named Hayes. She set down her ledger. He brought in a beautiful oak dining table last week. Hand-carved legs, probably 1920s. Said he had more items coming from the estate liquidation. Frank's inventory photos confirmed the identification. The table sat in a corner of the shop, its surface gleaming with the same polish Eleanor had probably applied for decades. Lily photographed it from multiple angles. Each image felt like documenting a crime scene. Evidence of theft dressed up as legal liquidation. Beth provided a receipt without prompting. Date, amount, Brandon's signature. $225 for a table that should have sold for 4 times that much. He was in a hurry, Beth explained. Could tell he wanted quick cash more than fair value. Probably could have held out for $400 to the right buyer. They hit 3 more locations before sunset. A pawn shop in Lander where Brandon had sold Eleanor's collection of silver spurs. The owner remembered him clearly. Young guy with expensive taste and no patience. Wanted everything converted to cash immediately. A consignment store that had purchased vintage saddles. Hand-tooled leather with Eleanor's initials burned into the underside. The store owner hadn't even known they were stolen goods until Lily showed her the inventory photos. An antique dealer in Riverton who had bought a set of ceramic horses that Eleanor had collected since the 1950s. 40 years of accumulation sold for $300. Each stop added to their documentation. Receipts, photographs, witness statements. A paper trail that proved Brandon was systematically stripping Dawson Ranch of everything that could be converted to currency. By the time they returned to Grace's trailer, Lily's phone held dozens of images and enough evidence to make any judge question Brandon's intentions. But it wasn't enough, not yet. Frank arrived at sunset with Mia in tow. The girl was dirty and exhausted and happier than Lily had seen her in years. Her jeans were stained with mud. Her hair had escaped its ponytail. A piece of straw stuck out from behind one ear like a misplaced decoration. Emmy, Frank let me help feed the chickens, and I saw cows up close. Real cows. They're so big, and one of them looked at me like she knew who I was. Lily pulled her sister into a hug, breathing in the smell of animals and fresh air, and something that might have been hope. Frank watched the reunion with an expression that was almost soft. She's a natural, has an eye for animals that can't be taught. Noticed one of the heifers was favoring her left front leg before I did. He turned to Lily. Your grandmother had the same gift. Could read an animal's health from across a pasture. Looks like it runs in the family. The next 10 days became a crash course in survival. Frank Mitchell trained like he was preparing soldiers for deployment. Every moment carried purpose. Every lesson built on the one before. Every mistake became an opportunity to learn something that might save them later. On the first morning, Lily learned that ranching started before the sun did. Frank woke her at 4:15 with a single knock on the guest room door. No words, just the knock and the sound of his boots retreating toward the kitchen. By the time she stumbled out of bed and found her way to Grace's coffee pot, he was already outside, his breath visible in the cold pre-dawn air. The temperature had dropped overnight. Her thin jacket from Riverton was useless against Wyoming's morning chill. Frank noticed, but said nothing. He simply handed her a heavy canvas coat from the back of his truck. It smelled like hay and motor oil and decades of hard work. First lesson: the ranch doesn't care if you're comfortable. It only cares if you show up. They drove to a neighboring property, Bill Carter's place. The man had known Eleanor for 40 years and had agreed to let them practice on his land while the legal battle over Dawson Ranch continued. Lily spent the first hour learning to count cattle. It sounded simple. It was anything but. The animals moved constantly, shifting positions as they grazed, disappearing behind rises in the terrain, clustering together in ways that made accurate counting nearly impossible. Frank watched her fail 3 times before offering guidance. You're counting heads. Count legs and divide by 4. Easier to track. The advice was practical and immediate, the kind of knowledge that only came from years of doing something every single day. By noon, Lily's legs ached from walking uneven ground. Her shoulders burned from carrying equipment she didn't know how to use. Her pride stung from the dozens of corrections Frank had offered, each one delivered with the same flat patience that somehow made them worse than criticism. But she didn't quit. Mia appeared at lunch with sandwiches Grace had made. The girl had spent the morning learning about chickens and eggs and the simple mathematics of feeding a small flock. Her enthusiasm was infectious, cutting through the exhaustion that had settled into Lily's bones. Frank says I can help with the cattle tomorrow. Can you believe it, Emmy? Me, working with real cows. Lily managed to smile despite her fatigue. Seeing her sister happy was worth every aching muscle, worth every humiliation, worth whatever this battle would cost. The second day focused on equipment. Frank led her through the basics of tractor operation. The clutch that stuck, the brake that pulled to the left, the steering wheel that required constant correction to maintain a straight line. Every machine on a ranch has personality, Frank explained as she ground the gears for the fifth time. You have to learn its quirks before you can work together. The philosophy extended beyond tractors. Every tool had a proper use and a proper way to be stored. Every piece of equipment required regular maintenance. Neglect any single element, and the whole system could fail at the worst possible moment. On the third day, they studied animal health. A cow's eyes tell you everything, Frank said, as they walked through Bill Carter's herd. Bright and clear means healthy. Dull or cloudy means trouble. He showed her how to check for parasites, how to recognize the early signs of respiratory infection, how to spot the subtle changes in posture that indicated internal pain. Your grandmother could diagnose an animal from 50 yards away. Saved her fortune in vet bills over the years. The skill can be learned, but it takes time. Time you might not have. The warning was clear. Brandon Hayes wasn't waiting. He was selling off the ranch piece by piece while Lily struggled to learn skills that should have been taught to her since childhood. The fourth and fifth days brought weather lessons. Frank taught her to read the sky like a book. The high cirrus clouds that meant a storm was coming in 2 days. The building cumulus that warned of afternoon thunderstorms. The wall of gray on the western horizon that promised rain within hours. He taught her to feel the wind, the way it shifted direction before a pressure change, the way it died completely in the moments before something violent arrived. Your grandmother never owned a weather app, didn't need one. She could feel a storm coming in her bones 3 days before it hit. On the sixth day, they reviewed Eleanor's financial records. This was where the war would be won or lost, not in pastures or barns, but in ledgers and spreadsheets. In the brutal arithmetic of income versus expense. Ranch profit margins are razor thin, Frank explained, as he walked her through decades of records. A good year might net you 10%. A bad year can wipe out 5 good ones. You have to plan for disaster because disaster is inevitable. Eleanor's book showed exactly what he meant. Drought years where the herd had to be sold at a loss. Market crashes that turned profitable calves into break-even transactions. Equipment failures that devoured entire seasons of carefully hoarded savings. But they also showed resilience, recovery after every setback, rebuilding after every disaster. 60 years of refusing to quit no matter what the numbers said. That's the difference between ranchers who survive and ranchers who don't, Frank said. It's not about the good years. It's about surviving the bad ones. The seventh day brought the moment that changed everything between Frank and Mia. 4:30 in the morning. Check the cattle. Learn to count heads in the gray light before dawn, when the animals were still gathered close after the night's rest. 6 in the morning. Equipment maintenance. The tractor that needed its oil changed. The fence post that had to be replaced before winter. The irrigation pump that made a rattling sound in cold weather and would need a new valve before the frost came. 8 in the morning. Financial review. Eleanor's ledgers going back 30 years. Income and expenses, profit margins and loss years. The brutal mathematics of ranching, where one bad season could erase a decade of careful building. Noon, animal health assessment. Learning to read a cow's eyes for signs of illness. Checking hooves for the infections that could spread through a herd like wildfire. Understanding the body language that signaled stress or injury or the early stages of disease. Afternoon, weather prediction. Frank taught them to read the clouds the way their ancestors had before satellites and smartphones. To feel the shift in wind that meant a storm was coming. To smell the change in air pressure that preceded rain or snow. Evening, history lessons. Stories about Eleanor that painted a picture of a woman Lily had never known. A woman who had worked this land for 60 years. Who had buried a husband and watched a son leave and still found the strength to continue. Mia absorbed everything like a sponge. The girl who had spent 6 years in foster homes learning to be invisible and compliant suddenly had permission to be curious, to ask questions, to explore a world that had always been closed to her. She learned to identify different grasses by touch, To tell the difference between useful plants and weeds that would choke a pasture if left unchecked. To read the tracks animals left in soft earth and understand the stories they told. On the seventh day, she spotted something Frank had missed. That cow there, the brown one with the white face. She's walking wrong. Frank followed her pointing finger, squinted at the animal in question. Looks fine to me. No, watch her back legs. She's not putting full weight on the right side. They walked closer. Frank bent to examine the heifer's hoof. His expression shifted from skepticism to surprise. She's got a stone bruise starting. Another day or two and it would have been infected. He straightened and looked at Mia with new respect. Your grandmother had eyes like that. Could spot trouble before it happened. Saved us thousands in vet bills over the years. The girl beamed with a pride Lily had never seen on her face before. The pride of being useful, of belonging, of having a skill that mattered. On the 10th day, they walked the perimeter of Dawson Ranch. Frank led them along fence lines that marked the edges of what should have been their inheritance. 800 hectares of rolling grassland and cottonwood groves and weathered outbuilding that told the story of 4 generations. The morning was cool and bright. Dew still clung to the grass, darkening the hems of their jeans as they walked. Birds called from the trees, In the distance, cattle moved as dark shapes against the green. This was what they were fighting for. This land that breathed and grew and demanded attention every single day. Frank pointed out landmarks as they walked. The old irrigation pump that needed replacing. The pasture that flooded every spring and required cattle to be moved to higher ground by late March. The cottonwood grove where Eleanor used to sit on summer evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Each detail added another layer to Lily's understanding. The ranch wasn't just property, it was a living thing. A system of interlocking parts that had to be maintained and balanced and respected. Then they crested a small rise and Frank stopped abruptly. That's the root cellar, behind the main house. Lily followed his gaze to a structure she had initially dismissed as just another outbuilding. But something about it stood out. The way it hunkered against the earth. The heavy bulkhead doors sealed with multiple padlocks. The weathered board nailed across the entrance. 3 locks. One was old and rusted, the metal corroded by decades of Wyoming weather. But 2 were new, shiny, the brass bright against the weathered wood. Mia noticed it first. Why does it have so many locks? Frank's expression darkened. The muscles in his jaw tightened. That cellar has been sealed since 1995. Eleanor forbade anyone from going down there. Not me, not ranch hands, not even Robert. What happened in 1995? Frank was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old secrets. That's the year your father left. Lily felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not literally, but in the way that happened when a piece of information changed everything you thought you understood. He and Eleanor had a fight, big enough that Robert packed his truck and drove out that same night. Didn't come back until you were born, Lily. Frank studied the sealed cellar with an expression Lily couldn't read. Whatever they fought about, it was connected to that cellar. Eleanor wouldn't talk about it. Not to me, not to anyone. Just said some things needed to stay buried. Mia walked toward the structure, her natural curiosity overriding caution. Her small fingers traced the padlocks, examining each one with careful attention. This one is really old, she touched the rusted lock. But these 2 are new, like really new. Lily's stomach dropped. Brandon added locks. Frank's voice went flat with certainty, which means he knows something's down there. Something worth protecting from anyone who might come looking. Grace had been listening in silence. Now she moved closer to the cellar, her eyes scanning the weathered wood. Eleanor told me once that the cellar held the truth about the Dawson family. Said some truths needed to stay buried. She pointed to faded writing carved into the board that sealed the entrance. Private, Ed, 1990. Eleanor's initials. A date 5 years before the fight that drove Robert away. Lily's mind raced through implications. A sealed cellar. A family fight violent enough to break a father from his mother. Brandon Hayes adding new security to something that had been locked for nearly 30 years. Whatever was buried beneath that farmhouse, it mattered. It mattered enough for Eleanor to guard it for 3 decades. It mattered enough for Brandon to protect it now. We need to know what's in there. Frank shook his head. That would require cutting locks and breaking into property you don't legally own yet. Brandon would have you arrested. It would destroy your case. Lily knew he was right, but the cellar pulled at her attention like a wound that wouldn't heal. Her father had left because of something connected to that underground room. Had never come back until she was born. had never explained why. Then we gather evidence first, prove Brandon's a fraud, get legal access to the ranch. Her voice carried a determination that surprised even herself. Then we open that cellar and find out what my father and grandmother fought about. Grace arrived at the trailer late that evening with a box of old files, Eleanor's personal papers, things Grace had been holding for safekeeping since before the funeral. Bank statements, insurance documents, photographs spanning 60 years of life on the ranch. Lily spread the contents across Grace's kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. Mia sat beside her, sorting papers by date while Frank made coffee and Grace watched from the doorway. Most of the documents were routine. Property tax records, equipment receipts, the mundane paperwork of agricultural life. But near the bottom of the box, Lily found a photograph that made her blood run cold. The image was black and white, edges worn from handling. Eleanor stood beside a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. He wore a leather vest and expensive boots. His hand rested on Eleanor's shoulder with a possessiveness that was visible even across 30 years of faded photography. On the back, in Eleanor's handwriting, 2 lines that changed everything. Marcus Webb, 1993. Never trust this man. Grace made a sound like she had been struck. She took the photograph from Lily's hands. Her own hands trembled as she stared at the face of the man who had destroyed her family. That's him. That's Marcus Webb. Her voice cracked. Eleanor knew him. 30 years ago, Eleanor knew the man who stole my ranch. The implications crashed through Lily's mind like waves against stone. Marcus Webb had targeted Grace's family in 1998, had used forged documents and smooth talk to steal $30,000 and trigger a chain of events that ended with a dead father and a foreclosed ranch. But Eleanor had known him in 1993, 5 years earlier, had photographed him with a warning that suggested she understood exactly what kind of man he was. How did my grandmother know Marcus Webb? Grace shook her head. Her eyes hadn't left the photograph. I don't know, but if Marcus is connected to Brandon Hayes, she looked up at Lily with an expression that mixed fear and fury in equal measure. We're not dealing with some opportunist who saw a chance to steal an inheritance. We're dealing with a predator who's been circling this ranch for 30 years. Frank took the photograph, studying it with the careful attention of a soldier analyzing enemy intelligence. Eleanor was afraid of this man. You can see it in her posture, the way she's holding herself. She's not comfortable. Then why is she standing with him? I don't know. But whatever happened between them in 1993, it scared her enough to seal that cellar 2 years later and drive her own son away. Lily stared at the image of Marcus Webb. Cold eyes, predator's smile, a man who had spent 3 decades hunting the same prey. He proposed to her. Everyone turned to look at Grace. The older woman's voice came out hollow, distant, like she was remembering something she had tried hard to forget. Eleanor mentioned it once. Once. Years ago, said a man had proposed to her in the early 90s, said she turned him down because she could tell he wanted her land more than he wanted her. Marcus Webb proposed to my grandmother, and she rejected him. Grace's eyes hardened. A man like that doesn't forget rejection, doesn't forgive it. He just waits. 30 years of waiting. Lily looked at the photograph again, at the possessive hand on Eleanor's shoulder, at the cold calculation behind the smile. If Marcus Webb had spent 3 decades trying to claim Dawson Ranch, then Brandon Hayes wasn't the enemy. He was just a tool, a puppet being manipulated by someone who had been planning this theft since before Lily was born. We need to get into that house, find out what Brandon knows about Marcus. Frank's expression was grim. If you're caught, you lose everything. If I don't try, I lose everything anyway. At least this way I'm fighting. Grace set the photograph on the table with careful precision. I've waited 20 years to face the man who destroyed my family. If Marcus Webb is behind this, I want to see him pay. She looked at Lily with eyes that burned with 2 decades of unquenched fire. I'll help you get into that house, whatever it takes. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows of Grace's trailer. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The same sound Lily had heard her first night in Wyoming. But it didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded like a war cry. She picked up the photograph of Marcus Webb and studied the face of the man who had haunted this land for 30 years. The man who had stolen Grace's ranch. The man who might be responsible for driving her father away. The man who was about to discover that the granddaughter of Eleanor Dawson didn't run from predators. She hunted them. Tomorrow, Lily said. We go into the house tomorrow. Frank nodded slowly. His expression had shifted from reluctance to something that looked almost like pride. Then we plan it right. We plan it smart. And we make sure that when you come out, you have everything we need to bury Brandon Hayes and Marcus Webb together. Grace raised her coffee mug like a toast. To hunting predators, Lily raised her own. To protecting what's ours. Mia had fallen asleep hours ago, exhausted from another day of learning skills she had never imagined she would need. Grace had retreated to her bedroom, leaving Lily and Frank alone in the dim kitchen light. The old soldier studied the photograph of Marcus Webb one more time. I've seen men like this before. In the service. Overseas. Men who believe the world owes them something and who will burn everything down before they admit defeat. You think he's dangerous? I think he's patient. Frank set the photograph down carefully. Impatient men are the most dangerous of all. They plan, they wait, they strike when you least expect it. Lily thought about her father, about the fight that had driven him from this land, about the car accident that had killed him and her mother on a mountain road. She had always assumed the accident was just bad luck, wrong place at the wrong time, the kind of tragedy that struck without reason or warning. But what if it wasn't? What if Marcus Webb's patience extended further than anyone had imagined? Get some sleep. Frank's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. Tomorrow's going to be hard. You'll need your strength. Lily nodded, but she knew sleep would be difficult to find. Too many questions burning in her mind. Too many shadows taking shape in the darkness. She walked to the window and looked out at the Wyoming night one more time. The stars were brilliant overhead, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The same stars her grandmother had watched for 60 years. The same stars her father had grown up under before something drove him away. Somewhere out there, Brandon Hayes was sleeping in Eleanor's bed, surrounded by Eleanor's things, planning to sell Eleanor's legacy to the highest bidder. And somewhere else, maybe Marcus Webb was watching, waiting, patient as a spider in the center of its web. Tomorrow, Lily would walk into enemy territory. Tomorrow, she would find the truth. And tomorrow, the war for Dawson Ranch would truly begin. Outside, the Wyoming wind carried the smell of sage and the promise of battle. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The land waited, as it had waited for thousands of years, for someone strong enough to claim it. Lily Carter had come to Wyoming with nothing but her sister and a letter from a grandmother she had never known. Now she had allies, knowledge, purpose, and most importantly, she had a target. Brandon Hayes would learn that the foster kids he had dismissed so easily were not going away. Marcus Webb would learn that 30 years of patience would end in failure. And the land that had belonged to the Dawson family for 4 generations would belong to Eleanor's granddaughters. Whatever it took, whatever the cost. Some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth dying for. And this land, this legacy, this chance at a real home, was both. The morning of the operation arrived with a sky the color of gunmetal. Clouds had rolled in overnight, heavy and low, pressing down on the Wyoming landscape like a lid being slowly closed. The air smelled of rain that hadn't fallen yet, that electric tension that preceded storms. Lily stood at Grace's kitchen window, watching the light struggle to penetrate the gray. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was calm. The fear that should have been consuming her had transformed into something harder, something sharper. Purpose. Frank Mitchell spread a hand-drawn map across the kitchen table. The paper was yellowed with age, covered in notations that represented decades of familiarity with Dawson Ranch. Every building, every fence line, every approach vector that might allow someone to enter unseen. He had drawn this map years ago, he explained. Eleanor had asked him to document everything in case of emergency, in case she ever needed to defend the ranch from threats she couldn't name. Now that map would help her granddaughter reclaim what had been stolen. Grace stood at the stove, making a coffee that nobody would drink. The ritual of it seemed to calm her nerves. The familiar motions of measuring grounds and pouring water provided structure in a moment that felt anything but structured. Mia sat in the corner, pretending to read a book about horses that Grace had found in a closet. But her eyes kept drifting to the table where the adults were planning something she knew was dangerous. Frank began his briefing with military precision. 3 entrances to the main house. His finger traced the routes as he spoke. Front door faces the main road. Anyone watching from town would see you approach. Anyone driving by would notice a stranger on the porch. Avoid it completely. His finger moved to the eastern side of the house. Mudroom entrance here, sheltered from view by the barn and a stand of lilacs that have gone wild since Eleanor stopped maintaining them. The bushes are overgrown enough to provide cover. This is your entry point. He pulled out a series of photographs. Images of the ranch from various angles, taken over the years as part of his documentation efforts. The mudroom leads directly into the kitchen. From there, you have access to the entire ground floor. The study is in the northeast corner. That's where Eleanor kept her important papers. That's where Brandon is probably keeping his. Lily memorized the layout, the distances, the angles of visibility and concealment. Her mind cataloged the information with the same efficiency she had once used to memorize foster care regulations and court procedures. 6 years in the system had taught her to absorb information quickly, to identify threats and opportunities, to plan escape routes before she even entered a room. Those skills were about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. Brandon leaves for town every afternoon around 2, usually gone until 5 or 6. That gives you 90 minutes maximum. Probably less. He's unpredictable. Sometimes he stops at the bar. Sometimes he meets with his lawyer. Sometimes he comes back early for no apparent reason. What if he comes back early? Frank pulled a pair of two-way radios from his bag. Military surplus, battered but functional. The kind of equipment that had probably saved lives in places far more dangerous than Wyoming. I'll be positioned on the ridge with binoculars. 1 click means move to exit position. Get to the mudroom and be ready to run. 2 clicks means abort immediately. Don't wait, don't question, don't try to grab one more piece of evidence. Just run. His eyes met hers with an intensity that demanded understanding. I've seen men die because they hesitated for half a second, because they wanted to finish what they were doing instead of responding to the signal. Don't be one of those men. Lily nodded. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her shoulders. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a spy. She was a 17-year-old girl from a group home in Riverton who had never broken into anything more serious than a vending machine. But she was also the granddaughter of Eleanor Dawson, the daughter of Robert Carter. And if her family had taught her anything, it was that some things were worth risking everything for. Grace appeared from the back room carrying something wrapped in cloth. She set it on the table and unwrapped it carefully, revealing what lay inside with the reverence of someone handling a holy relic. A brass key, tarnished with age, the metal worn smooth from decades of handling. Eleanor gave this to me 15 years ago. For emergencies, she said, in case something ever happened and someone needed to get inside without going through official channels. Grace pushed the key across the table toward Lily. I think this is the emergency she was preparing for. Lily picked up the key. It was heavier than she expected. Not physically, but in the weight of what it represented. Her grandmother had known this day might come, had prepared for it, had trusted Grace to be ready when the moment arrived. What about Mia? Frank answered before Grace could. She stays here with Grace. No arguments. This isn't a place for children. Lily had expected that, had dreaded it, but she knew Frank was right. Whatever she found in that house, whatever dangers lurked in the shadows of Brandon Hayes' occupation, Mia couldn't be part of it. The girl appeared in the doorway as if summoned by the mention of her name. Her eyes were red from crying, though she was trying hard to hide it. She had heard enough to understand what was happening. Emmy, please don't go. The words cut through Lily's carefully constructed composure. She crossed the room and knelt in front of her sister, taking both of Mia's hands in her own. I have to do this. You know I do. What if something happens to you? What if Brandon catches you and you go to jail and I never see you again? The fears poured out in a rush, the accumulated terror of a child who had already lost everyone she loved once and couldn't bear to lose them again. Lily pulled her sister close. Listen to me. I've kept us together through 7 foster homes, through every caseworker who tried to separate us, through every time someone said it would be easier if we weren't together. She leaned back to look into Mia's eyes. I'm not going to let some con man in expensive boots take our home, and I'm not going to let anything happen that keeps me away from you. Do you understand? Mia nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I need you to be brave. Stay with Grace, help her with the chickens, and when I come back, we're going to have everything we need to win this fight. The girl threw her arms around Lily's neck, holding on with desperate strength. Promise you'll come back. I promise. 60 more years, remember. I'm too stubborn to leave early. Frank drove her to within a quarter mile of Dawson Ranch. The truck rolled to a stop behind a stand of cottonwoods that provided cover from the main road. Through the trees, Lily could see the outline of the farmhouse, the red barn, the outbuildings that dotted the property like satellites orbiting a central star. Brandon's silver truck sat in the driveway. He hadn't left for town yet. They waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. Lily watched the house through Frank's binoculars, tracking movement behind windows, cataloging the patterns of Brandon Hayes' daily routine. At 1:45, the front door opened. Brandon emerged wearing the same expensive boots he had worn in the feed store. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. Lily waited until the sound of his engine faded completely before opening the truck door. Frank caught her arm. 90 minutes. Not a second more. I'll be watching from the ridge. Trust the radio. Lily nodded and stepped out into the Wyoming afternoon. The walk to the ranch house felt endless. Every step seemed to take an eternity. Every sound made her freeze, certain that Brandon had somehow returned without warning. The grass whispered against her legs. The wind moved through the cottonwoods with a sound like distant voices. The mudroom entrance appeared exactly as Frank had described. A simple wooden door sheltered from view by the barn's massive shadow and the overgrown lilac bushes that had once been Eleanor's pride. Lily pressed her palm against the weathered wood. This was it, the point of no return. She pulled out the brass key. It slid into the lock with surprising ease. The tumblers clicked. The mechanism turned. The door swung inward on hinges that barely whispered. Lily stepped into her grandmother's house. The smell hit her first, cheap cologne layered over cigarette smoke and fast food containers. The scent of a stranger who had turned someone else's home into his personal territory. It was wrong, invasive, a violation that went beyond legal technicalities. The mudroom opened into a kitchen that should have been warm and welcoming. Eleanor's kitchen, the heart of a home that had stood for 4 generations. But the warmth was gone. Brandon had stripped away every trace of the woman who had lived here. Family photographs had been removed from the walls, leaving pale rectangles where frames had protected paint from decades of sunlight. Generic artwork hung in their place. The kind of mass-produced prints sold in bulk at discount stores, chosen by someone who viewed this house as inventory rather than inheritance. Lily pulled out her phone and began documenting everything. The empty spaces where Eleanor's ceramic horse collection had once stood, the bare mantle that should have held family photos spanning generations, the gaps in shelving where antiques and heirlooms had been removed and sold to the highest bidder. Each photograph was evidence. Each empty space was proof of systematic theft. She moved through the house like a ghost, careful not to disturb anything, careful not to leave evidence of her presence. The living room, the dining room, the parlor where Eleanor had probably entertained guests for 6 decades. All of it stripped, hollowed out, reduced to the bones of a building that had once been a home. The study occupied a corner room with windows overlooking the eastern pastures. This was Eleanor's space, the room where she had managed the business of running 800 hectares of Wyoming ranch land. The walls were lined with bookshelves, most of them now empty. A roll-top desk dominated the center of the room, its surface cluttered with papers that didn't belong. Brandon's papers. Lily approached the desk carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she began sorting through the documents, photographing each one before moving to the next. Bills from storage unit rentals, 3 different facilities in 3 different towns. Brandon was storing the items he couldn't sell immediately, waiting for the legal situation to clarify before liquidating everything at once. Correspondence with auction houses, estimates for furniture, appraisals for jewelry Eleanor had probably worn on her wedding day. Cold calculations that reduced a lifetime of collecting to dollar amounts in profit margins. A handwritten list of items with estimated values. The dining table Lily had seen at the antique barn was on the list. So were dozens of other pieces, each one carefully researched, each one assigned a price tag. This wasn't just opportunistic theft. It was systematic, planned. The work of someone who had prepared for this moment long before Eleanor died. The bottom drawer of the desk held what Lily was looking for, a manila folder labeled Hayes' claim in Brandon's blocky handwriting. Inside, she found the evidence that would destroy him. Copies of the letters supposedly from Eleanor, each one praising her grandson Brandon, each one expressing regret over lost years and family rifts, each one written in handwriting that mimicked Eleanor's flowing script but failed in subtle ways. The pen pressure was wrong, unnatural. The hesitation marks appeared where confidence should have lived. The spacing suggested tracing rather than natural composition. Forgeries. Obvious ones if you knew what to look for. Beneath the letters lay something even more damning. A birth certificate for Brandon Hayes. The document claimed his mother was Sarah Dawson, daughter of Eleanor Dawson, born 1972. But Eleanor had only one child, Robert Carter, born 1969. There was no daughter, no Sarah. The entire document was fabricated, complete with official-looking seals that had probably been purchased from the same website that sold the forged letter templates. Lily photographed everything. Her phone's camera clicked silently as it captured fraud that should have been obvious to any investigator who bothered to check basic genealogy records. But Brandon was counting on the legal system's glacial pace, betting he could liquidate and disappear before anyone questioned his claim too closely. A smaller envelope tucked behind the folder made Lily's blood run cold. Inside printed pages, how to forge signatures, a complete guide, sections highlighted in yellow, notes scrawled in margins, practice sheets filled with attempts to replicate Eleanor's signature. The progression showed Brandon's improvement from obvious fake to convincing reproduction. And beneath those practice sheets, a handwritten draft on yellow legal paper. The words made Lily's vision tunnel. Marcus, move fast. Once I'm named executor, we liquidate everything. Use the story, estranged grandson, tragic family rift, reconciliation before death. The orphan girls won't see it coming. 3 million ranch split 60-40 after sale. B. Marcus. The name confirmed everything they had suspected. Brandon Hayes was a puppet, a tool being manipulated by the man who had proposed to Eleanor 30 years ago and spent 3 decades nursing his rejection into a weapon. Marcus Webb wasn't just connected to this scheme. He was running it. Gravel crunched outside. Lily froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs hard enough that she was certain whoever was outside could hear it. Too early. Brandon was back too early. She heard a truck door slam, boots on the porch steps, male voices, not one, two. The front door opened. Told you the hearing's in 3 weeks. Brandon's voice carried through the house with the casual confidence of someone who believed victory was inevitable. It's locked down. Judge won't even look at their case seriously. 2 foster kids with no money and no connections? We've already won. Another voice responded, older, colder, carrying the kind of authority that came from decades of getting exactly what he wanted. Don't get cocky. Eleanor underestimated me once. I won't make the same mistake with her granddaughter. Lily pressed against the hallway wall, mind racing through exit options. The mudroom was 20 feet away. Brandon and his companion were entering through the front, maybe 15 feet in the opposite direction. If she moved now, they would hear her. If she waited, they might walk deeper into the house and she could slip out. The voices continued, moving toward the kitchen. Some orphan with the little sister? Brandon laughed, the sound devoid of anything resembling warmth. Even if she shows up, we've covered our tracks. The documentation is solid. My lawyer says the will contest could drag out for years. By then, the ranch will be sold and we'll be long gone. The older voice cut through Brandon's confidence like a blade. Your lawyer is an idiot, and you're an idiot for trusting him. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know how these things can go wrong. Footsteps moved closer. Lily could hear them entering the kitchen, opening the refrigerator, settling into the space as if they owned it, which legally they currently did. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Frank, all caps. Abort now. But moving meant being heard. Staying meant being trapped. Then the older voice spoke again, and Lily finally understood what she was dealing with. Eleanor stole 30 years from me. In 1993, I asked her to marry me. I had plans for this land. Development deals, water rights negotiations. She would have been set for life. A cabinet opened, the sound of liquid being poured into glasses. But she said no. Said I looked at her property deed more than I looked at her. Said she could see what I really wanted. The bitterness in the voice was concentrated, refined, aged for 3 decades into something pure and poisonous. From that moment, I decided this ranch would be mine, one way or another. If she wouldn't give it to me through marriage, I would take it through other means. Brandon's laugh was nervous now, uncertain. And you waited 30 years? Patience is how you build an empire. I targeted her son first, Robert. Found out he had gambling debts, drinking problems. The kind of weaknesses that make a man desperate. Ice clinked in glasses. In 2010, I offered him a loan, $50,000. He thought he was saving the ranch. He was really giving me leverage. Lily's chest tightened. Her father. Marcus Webb had targeted her father. Robert paid me back eventually. Every penny. But by then, I had what I really wanted. A connection to the family. Documentation of their financial troubles. Evidence I could use when the time was right. And when Eleanor died, Marcus Webb's voice hardened. When Eleanor died, I activated Brandon. My insurance policy. the fake grandson who would contest the will while I maneuvered behind the scenes. The conversation continued, but Lily had heard enough. She began moving toward the mudroom, each step placed with desperate care to avoid creaking floorboards. $3 million, Marcus's voice drifted from the kitchen. Split 60-40 after expenses. That's your share for playing the grieving grandson. Don't get greedy, don't get sloppy, and don't underestimate those girls. Brandon's response was dismissive. What are they gonna do? They're kids. Orphans. Nobody gives a damn about them. Nobody except me. Lily froze at the edge of the hallway. Marcus Webb's voice had dropped to something quiet and dangerous. I've watched this family for 30 years. Watched Robert drink himself into desperation. Watched Eleanor grow old and stubborn. Watched those two girls get shuffled through the foster system like unwanted packages. Footsteps, moving toward the hallway. The older one has something in her eyes. Something I saw in Eleanor when she was young. That's why I wanted her. That's why I want her granddaughter to lose everything. Because she's exactly like the woman who rejected me. And I want her to feel what I felt. The footsteps were getting closer. Lily abandoned stealth and ran. Her boots hit the mudroom floor as shouts erupted behind her. She slammed through the door into the afternoon air, legs pumping, lungs burning with adrenaline and terror. The lilac bushes whipped against her face as she crashed through them. The barn loomed to her left. The cottonwood grove waited ahead, promising cover if she could just reach it. Behind her, the mudroom door banged open. Hey, stop! Brandon's voice, furious, shocked. He hadn't expected anyone to be inside, hadn't expected his supposedly secure base of operations to be compromised. Lily didn't look back. She ran through the grass, through the fence line, through the trees. Branches slapped her face, drew blood from her cheek, caught in her hair. She didn't care. Distance was all that mattered. Distance and the truck waiting on the other side of the ridge. Frank's vehicle materialized like an answered prayer. She wrenched the passenger door open and threw herself inside, gasping for breath, hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the seat. Drive. Frank didn't ask questions. The truck lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, engine roaring as he pushed it to speeds the old vehicle probably hadn't seen in years. Only when they had cleared 2 miles did he risk speaking. Did he see you? Lily shook her head, still fighting to control her breathing. Got out just before they reached the back. But Frank? Brandon wasn't alone. The old soldier's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. Marcus Webb was with him, in the house. They were talking about everything. The fake documents, the plan to sell the ranch. The 30 years Marcus has been waiting for this. Frank pulled the truck onto the shoulder. The engine idled roughly as he turned to face her, his expression carved from stone. Marcus Webb was in that house. You heard him speak. I heard everything. Lily pulled out her phone, scrolling to the voice memo app she had activated when she first heard the gravel crunch. I recorded it, all of it. Frank's eyes widened. They talked about targeting my father, about the $50,000 loan, about how Marcus has been planning this since 1993. She played the recording. Marcus Webb's voice filled the truck cab, cold and calculating, laying out 30 years of obsession in casual conversation. When the recording ended, Frank sat in silence for a long moment. This changes everything. There's more. Lily pulled up the photographs on her phone, the forged birth certificate, the practice signatures, the letter to Marcus detailing their profit split. She showed him image after image, evidence of fraud so blatant it should end Brandon Hayes' claim immediately. But Frank's expression remained troubled. It's good evidence, maybe even enough to get Brandon's claim dismissed. But Marcus Webb is smart. He's been doing this for 30 years without getting caught. He'll find a way to distance himself from Brandon if things go wrong. Then we need something that ties them together undeniably. Frank nodded slowly. We need to find out what really happened to your father. They returned to Grace's trailer as the sun was setting. Mia launched herself at Lily before she had fully emerged from the truck. The girl's arms wrapped around her waist with desperate strength, her face buried against Lily's stomach. You came back, you promised, and you came back. Lily held her sister close, breathing in the familiar scent of cheap shampoo and Wyoming dust. I told you, too stubborn to leave early. Grace and Frank gathered around the kitchen table as Lily laid out everything she had found. The photographs, the recording, the evidence of a conspiracy that stretched back 3 decades. Grace's face went pale when she heard Marcus Webb's voice on the recording. The man who had destroyed her family, speaking casually about destroying another. When the presentation was finished, Grace spoke the words that had been hanging in the air since Lily's escape. So Eleanor knew Marcus 30 years ago, rejected his proposal, and he's been planning revenge ever since. It's worse than that. Lily pulled up the photograph of the letter to Marcus. Look at the date. This was written 2 weeks before Eleanor died. Brandon was in contact with Marcus before she was even buried. Frank's jaw tightened. They were waiting for her to do, planning the theft before her heart stopped beating. The room fell silent. The weight of Marcus Webb's patience pressed down on all of them. 30 years of watching, waiting, manipulating events from the shadows. Lily's phone rang. David Reynolds, the attorney. His voice carried an urgency she hadn't heard before. Miss Carter, we have a problem. What kind of problem? Marcus Webb just filed an intervention claim with the court. He's presenting himself as a creditor with superior rights to the estate. Lily's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means he has documentation of a $50,000 loan to your father in 2010, an IOU signed by Robert Carter with Dawson Ranch listed as collateral. He's claiming the debt was never repaid. But my father paid him back. I heard Marcus admit it in the recording. A recording obtained through potentially illegal means. David's voice was carefully neutral. It might not be admissible. And even if it is, Marcus can claim he was lying to Brandon, trying to impress him. So what happens if the court believes his claim? If the debt is valid and unpaid, Marcus Webb becomes a secured creditor. He gets paid before any inheritance is distributed. And if there's not enough liquid assets to cover the debt, he gets the ranch. David's silence was confirmation enough. Lily ended the call and stared at the table full of evidence that suddenly seemed worthless. They had proof Brandon was a fraud. They had recordings of Marcus admitting his 30-year vendetta. They had documentation of forgery and conspiracy and theft. But none of it mattered if Marcus could claim legal ownership through a debt that may or may not have been repaid 13 years ago. Grace stood abruptly. I saved all of Eleanor's papers, everything she gave me over the years. If Robert paid that debt, there might be proof. She disappeared into the back room and returned with boxes of files. Old envelopes, correspondence spanning decades. They spread the contents across every available surface. Kitchen table, counters, floor. 4 people searching through 30 years of paper records, looking for evidence that might not exist. Mia found it. The girl had been sorting through a box of personal letters, handling each one with the careful attention she brought to everything. Her small fingers pulled an envelope from the stack. Handwriting on the front that made her freeze. Emmy, this is Daddy's writing. Lily took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, a letter dated July 27, 2011, 1 month before her father died. She read the words aloud, her voice growing steadier as the implications became clear. Mom, I paid Marcus everything I owed. Every penny, but he's not satisfied. He says you promised him the ranch in 1993 when you rejected his proposal. He says the debt was just the beginning, that he deserves more. Lily's throat tightened. I'm meeting him Saturday to end this once and for all, to tell him that the debt is cleared and he has no claim on our family. Whatever happened between you and him 30 years ago, it ends now. She forced herself to continue. If anything happens to me, protect Lily and Mia from this man. Don't let him near my daughters. He's not going to stop. He's never going to stop. The letter ended with words that broke her heart. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for the drinking. I'm sorry for leaving. I'm sorry I wasn't the son you deserved. But I'm going to make this right. I'm going to protect my family. Love, Robert. The room was silent. Grace finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert wrote this letter on July 27th. He was planning to meet Marcus on Saturday, which would have been August 1st. Frank continued the timeline. Robert Carter died on August 2nd, 2011, single car accident on a mountain road. 1 day after the meeting, Lily stared at her father's handwriting. The man she had only known for 9 years, the man Brandon Hayes had called a drunk and a failure, the man who had apparently died trying to protect his daughters from a monster. If my father paid the debt, there has to be proof, a bank record, a receipt, something. Grace shook her head. Eleanor would have kept it. She kept everything. But if it's not in these boxes, then it's somewhere else. Lily's voice hardened. Somewhere Marcus Webb doesn't want us to find it. The cellar. Everyone turned to look at Frank. The old soldier's expression was grim. Eleanor sealed that cellar in 1995, the same year Robert left after their fight. Whatever happened between them, whatever secret she's been protecting for 30 years, it's down there. And Brandon added new locks, Lily added, because he knows something's there too. Frank nodded slowly. If we're going to prove your father paid that debt, we need what's in that cellar. And we need to get it before Marcus Webb realizes we're this close. Mia had been quiet throughout the discussion, her small face processing information that no 10-year-old should have to handle. Now she spoke, her voice carrying a certainty that surprised everyone. Daddy wasn't a failure. Lily turned to her sister. The girl's eyes were bright with tears, but her jaw was set with familiar stubbornness. Brandon said Daddy was a drunk and a failure. But this letter says he was trying to protect us. That's not failure. That's being brave. She looked at Lily with an intensity that made her seem much older than 10. We have to finish what he started. We have to beat Marcus Webb. For Daddy. Lily pulled her sister close. We will, baby. We will. Outside, the Wyoming wind picked up. Storm clouds gathered on the western horizon, darker than before. The air smelled of rain and electricity and the promise of violence. Somewhere in Silver Creek, Marcus Webb was probably celebrating. His intervention claim filed, his 30-year plan reaching its final stages. His victory all but assured. He didn't know that 2 foster kids from Riverton had just found the weapon that would destroy him. He didn't know that the daughter of Robert Carter had inherited her father's determination to protect his family. And he didn't know that the storm coming to Dawson Ranch wasn't just weather. It was war. Grace broke the silence with the practical tone of someone who had spent 20 years waiting for this moment. Tomorrow, we take this evidence to David Reynolds. We file our own counterclaim, and we demand access to that cellar. Frank nodded slowly, his military mind already calculating the logistics. The evidence from the house alone might be enough to get Brandon's claim dismissed. The forged documents, the practiced signatures, the letter to Marcus, any judge with half a brain will see through this. But Marcus is the real threat. Lily's voice was steady despite the emotions roiling beneath the surface. Brandon is just his tool. If we don't take Marcus down, he'll just find another puppet, another scheme, another way to steal what doesn't belong to him. Grace's hands clenched into fists. I've waited 20 years to see that man face justice. 20 years of watching my father's grave and wondering if Marcus Webb even remembers the family he destroyed. She looked at Lily with eyes that burned with decades of unquenched fire. Your fight is my fight. Your enemy is my enemy. Whatever you need, I'm with you. Frank added his own pledge. Eleanor made me promise to protect her granddaughters. I don't take promises lightly, especially not promises to the dead. Lily looked at the people gathered around Grace's kitchen table. A grieving woman who had lost her ranch to the same predator. A soldier who had lost his son and found purpose in protecting someone else's children. And her sister, small and fierce and absolutely determined. They weren't much of an army, but they were enough. And if Brandon won't give us access legally, then we take it anyway. Lily's voice carried a coldness she hadn't known she possessed. Marcus Webb spent 30 years planning to steal my family's land. My father died trying to stop him. I'm not going to let his sacrifice be meaningless. She looked at the letter in her hands. Her father's final words to the mother he had disappointed. His last attempt to make things right. Robert Carter hadn't been a drunk or a failure. He had been a man fighting a battle he couldn't win. But his daughter could, and she would, whatever it took. Lily stayed awake long after the others had gone to sleep. She sat at Grace's kitchen table, her father's letter spread before her. The handwriting was slightly shaky, as if he had been nervous or upset when he wrote it. But the words were clear, the meaning unmistakable. Robert Carter had known he was walking into danger. Had known that Marcus Webb was capable of anything. Had gone to that meeting anyway because protecting his daughters was more important than protecting himself. And 6 days later, he was dead. Lily traced the letters with her fingertip. The curves of the R in Robert. The sweep of the L in love. These were the last words her father had written to his mother. The final testament of a man who had made mistakes, but was trying to make them right. She thought about this day of the accident. She had been 9 years old, playing in the backyard of their small apartment in Colorado while her mother made dinner inside. The police car had pulled up just as the sun was setting. 2 officers in pressed uniforms, their faces carefully blank. She remembered her mother's scream, the sound that had torn through the apartment like something physical, something that could shatter glass and stop hearts. She remembered Mia crying in her crib, too young to understand but old enough to feel the wrongness. She remembered the funeral, standing beside 2 closed caskets, holding her baby sister's hand, wondering why the adults kept saying things would be okay when clearly nothing would ever be okay again. And she remembered Eleanor, The woman had stood at the back of the chapel, silver-haired and rigid, her face a mask of controlled grief. Lily had wanted to go to her, had wanted to throw herself into her grandmother's arms and ask why this had happened, why her parents were gone, why the world had suddenly become so dark. But Eleanor had left before anyone could reach her, slipped out a side door and disappeared back to Wyoming, leaving two orphaned girls to face the system alone. For 6 years, Lily had hated her grandmother for that abandonment, had built walls around her heart specifically designed to keep out the woman who had chosen silence over family. Now she understood. Eleanor hadn't abandoned them out of cruelty. She had been afraid that Marcus Webb would target them next, afraid that getting close to her granddaughters would put them in danger, afraid that the monster she had rejected 30 years ago would use her love as a weapon. She had stayed away to protect them, and she had died still trying to make things right. Lily folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her pocket. She would carry it with her into the courtroom, into whatever battles lay ahead, a reminder of what she was fighting for and who she was fighting against. Tomorrow, they would present their evidence to David Reynolds. Tomorrow, they would file their counterclaim. Tomorrow, the war for Dawson Ranch would enter its final phase. But tonight, Lily allowed herself a moment of grief for the father she had lost too soon, for the grandmother she had never really known, for the family that Marcus Webb had systematically destroyed over 30 years of patient, relentless hatred. She cried silently in Grace's kitchen, surrounded by evidence of crimes that spanned 3 decades. The tears came slowly at first, then faster, until she was sobbing into her hands, her body shaking with grief she had held inside for far too long. When the tears finally stopped, something had changed. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but beneath it, something harder had taken root, something cold and sharp and absolutely determined. Marcus Webb had stolen her family. Now she was going to take everything from him. The storm that had been building all day finally broke around midnight. Thunder rolled across the Wyoming sky like artillery fire. Lightning illuminated the landscape in frozen moments of brilliant white. Rain hammered against Grace's trailer with a fury that seemed almost personal. Lily watched the storm from the window, feeling a strange kinship with its violence. Tomorrow, she would bring her own storm to Silver Creek, and Marcus Webb would learn that the granddaughter of Eleanor Dawson was not someone who could be underestimated. Not anymore. The Fremont County Courthouse rose from the Wyoming landscape like a monument to the idea that justice could be measured and delivered. Limestone walls that had stood for 100 years, windows that caught the morning sun and threw it back in blinding rectangles of light, a bronze statue of Lady Justice on the front lawn, her scales tipped slightly by decades of wind and weather. Lily stood on the courthouse steps, feeling smaller than she had felt since arriving in Silver Creek. The building seemed designed to intimidate, to remind everyone who entered that the law was bigger than any individual, older than any grievance, more powerful than any personal sense of right and wrong. Mia gripped her hand with desperate strength. The girl had insisted on coming, had refused to be left behind at Grace's trailer while her sister faced the battle that would determine their future. Lily had relented, knowing that Mia needed to see this, needed to understand that they were fighting not just for land, but for the right to exist as a family. David Reynolds met them at the entrance. The attorney looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from weeks of fighting a battle that should have been straightforward, but had become anything but. His briefcase bulged with documents. His suit was pressed, but showing signs of wear at the cuffs. They're already inside. His voice was low, meant only for their ears. Brandon and his lawyer. They arrived an hour ago. They're confident. Lily felt Frank's presence at her shoulder. The old soldier had dressed in the closest thing he owned to formal wear. Clean jeans, a button-down shirt that had probably been purchased for his son's funeral, boots polished to a shine that would pass military inspection. Grace stood on her other side, the woman who had waited 20 years for a chance to face the man who had destroyed her family. Her hands were steady, but Lily could see the tension in her jaw, the carefully controlled fury that was waiting for its moment. They entered the courthouse together. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock in courtroom 3. The hallway smelled of old paper and floor wax and the accumulated anxiety of everyone who had ever walked these corridors hoping for justice and fearing disappointment. Brandon Hayes sat at the defendant's table with his attorney. The lawyer was sharp-featured and expensive, the kind of legal representation that announced itself through perfectly tailored suits and gold cufflinks that caught the light. He radiated confidence. the confidence of someone who had won cases like this before and expected to win again. Brandon himself looked less certain. Something had changed since their confrontation in the feed store. The swagger was still there, but it was thinner now, more brittle, like a coating that might crack if pressed too hard. Lily took her seat at the plaintiff's table and forced herself not to look at him, not to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much his presence affected her. Judge Patricia Morningstar entered at precisely 9 o'clock. She was silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Reading glasses perched on her nose gave her the appearance of someone's grandmother, but her eyes held the assessment of a woman who had spent decades cutting through lies and had no patience for those who wasted her time. All rise. The courtroom rose. The Honorable Patricia Morningstar presiding. This is the matter of the estate of Eleanor Dawson, case number 23-742. Please be seated. Chairs scraped against the wooden floor as everyone settled back into place. The judge arranged papers on her bench with the methodical precision of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times. We are here today for the preliminary hearing on the contested will of Eleanor Margaret Dawson, deceased. The primary claimants are Lily Marie Carter, named beneficiary in the most recent will, and Brandon Michael Hayes, who claims inheritance rights as Eleanor Dawson's grandson through a prior marriage. She looked up, her gaze moving between the two tables. I have reviewed the submitted documentation from both parties. Before we proceed, I want to be clear about the purpose of this hearing. I am not here to make a final determination. I am here to assess whether Mr. Hayes' claim has sufficient merit to proceed to full trial, or whether it should be dismissed. Her attention fixed on Brandon's attorney. Mr. Whitmore, your client filed this claim 48 hours after Mrs. Dawson's funeral. He has been occupying the property and liquidating assets for 3 weeks. I expect your evidence to be substantial. The attorney stood with practiced smoothness. Your Honor, my client's claim is based on documented family connection. Brandon Hayes is the son of Sarah Dawson Hayes, Eleanor Dawson's daughter from her first marriage in 1972. We have provided a birth certificate, correspondence between Mrs. Dawson and her estranged grandson, and witness statements confirming the family relationship. David Reynolds rose to respond. Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that every piece of documentation submitted by Mr. Hayes is fraudulent. The birth certificate refers to a daughter who never existed. The correspondence was forged, and the witness statements come from individuals who were paid to lie. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. Those are serious accusations, Mr. Reynolds. We have serious evidence to support them. Judge Morningstar nodded slowly. Very well. We'll hear testimony from both claimants. Mr. Reynolds, call your first witness. The plaintiff calls Lily Marie Carter. Lily stood on legs that felt suddenly unreliable. The walk to the witness stand seemed to take forever. Each step echoed in the silent courtroom. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. Brandon's cold assessment, his lawyer's calculating scrutiny, the judge's neutral observation. She took her seat in the witness box and raised her right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. David Reynolds approached with a yellow legal pad in his hand. Miss Carter, please state your relationship to Eleanor Dawson. She was my grandmother, my father's mother. And when did you last see Mrs. Dawson in person? Lily's throat tightened at the memory. I was 9 years old. At my parents' funeral, she stood at the back of the chapel but left before anyone could speak to her. A murmur rippled through the small gallery. Judge Morningstar made a note. And you haven't seen her since that day? No, sir, but she kept a track of us. Lily's voice steadied as she found her footing. She collected our school photos, followed our movements through the foster care system, worried about us from a distance. How do you know this? Grace Sullivan told me. She worked with my grandmother for decades. She saw the photo collection, heard Eleanor talk about us. David nodded, building his foundation brick by brick. Miss Carter, Mr. Hayes claims that you have no real connection to Dawson Ranch, that you're simply an opportunist trying to claim property you know nothing about. Can you describe the ranch? Lily had prepared for this moment. 10 days of intensive training condensed into details that would prove she understood what she was fighting for. Dawson Ranch is 800 hectares of mixed grazing land and timber. The main house was built in 1894 by my great-great-grandfather Jeremiah Dawson. It has 3 entrances, front door facing the main road, mudroom entrance on the east side sheltered by the barn, back door through the kitchen that leads to the vegetable garden my grandmother maintained until her arthritis made it impossible. She continued, her voice growing stronger. The irrigation pump in the eastern pasture makes a rattling sound in cold weather because the valve needs replacement. It's been that way for 15 years, but Eleanor kept nursing it along because she hated spending money on anything that still worked. The third porch step creaks because there's a loose board underneath. It's been loose since my father was a boy. Eleanor talked about fixing it but never did because the sound reminded her of him. The courtroom had gone completely silent. The West Pasture floods every spring because of the drainage pattern from the hills above. You have to move cattle to higher ground by late March or risk losing calves to mud and cold. The barn has swallow nests in the rafters. The same families have been returning for 40 years. Eleanor marked their arrival in her ranch logs as a sign that winter was truly over. David let the details settle before asking his next question. How do you know these things, Miss Carter? You've never lived on the ranch. Frank Mitchell taught me. He was my grandmother's foreman for 20 years. He's been preparing me to take over the operation since I arrived in Silver Creek. And the personal details about my grandmother came from Grace Sullivan, who knew her for 4 decades. David turned to face the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to test Mr. Hayes' familiarity with the property he claims to have inherited. Brandon's attorney stood immediately. Objection. My client's knowledge of specific ranch operations is irrelevant to the legal question of inheritance rights. Judge Morningstar's expression remained neutral. Overruled. If Mr. Hayes is claiming to be Mrs. Dawson's grandson, he should have some familiarity with a property that has been in the family for over a century. Mr. Hayes, please take the stand. Brandon rose with visible reluctance. His swagger had evaporated completely. The confident predator from the feed store had been replaced by something smaller, something that looked almost afraid. He took the witness stand and swore his oath with a voice that cracked slightly on the final word. David Reynolds approached him like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Mr. Hayes, you claim to be Eleanor Dawson's grandson. How often did you visit her at Dawson Ranch? Brandon's pause was too long. We were estranged. We reconnected in her final months. So you only visited recently. Can you describe the main house? It's a farmhouse, 2 stories, old. What color is the front door? Another pause. Red? No, brown. David made a note. Where is the main well located on the property? Brandon's confidence flickered. In the well house, near the barn. The well is actually in the eastern pasture, 400 yards from the barn. It's basic geography that any rancher would know. David didn't give Brandon time to recover. What breed of cattle did Mrs. Dawson raise? Brandon grasped for an answer. Black ones, mostly black. Red Angus, Mr. Hayes. 40 head registered with the Wyoming Cattle Association, documented in your grandmother's records for the past 30 years. Brandon's face had gone pale. Can you describe the pasture rotation schedule that Mrs. Dawson used? Silence. Can you tell me what month the cattle are typically moved to summer pasture? More silence. Can you name a single piece of equipment in the barn? Brandon's jaw worked, but no words came out. David turned to face the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Hayes cannot answer basic questions about a ranch he claims as his inheritance. He doesn't know where the well is. He doesn't know what kind of cattle his grandmother raised. He doesn't know anything that a legitimate family member would know after even a single visit to the property. Brandon's attorney was on his feet. Objection. My client was estranged from his grandmother for years. His lack of specific knowledge about ranch operations doesn't negate his legal claim to inheritance. Judge Morningstar removed her glasses and fixed Brandon with a stare that could freeze water. Mr. Hayes, you claim to have reconnected with your grandmother in her final months. Did you visit the ranch during that time? Yes. How many times? Several. Specifically, Brandon swallowed hard. 3 or 4. And in 3 or 4 visits, you didn't notice what color the front door was. You didn't observe the cattle grazing in the pastures. You didn't ask your grandmother to show you around the property you were supposedly reconnecting over? The silence stretched. Return to your seat, Mr. Hayes. David Reynolds called his next witness. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence regarding the documentation Mr. Hayes submitted to support his claim. A handwriting expert took the stand. Dr. Sarah Chen, certified forensic document examiner, with credentials that filled an entire page and experience that spanned 2 decades. She had analyzed the letter supposedly written by Eleanor Dawson to her estranged grandson. I need 14 specific points of divergence between the questioned documents and Mrs. Dawson's authentic handwriting. The pen pressure is inconsistent with natural writing. The letter formations show hesitation marks that indicate tracing rather than original composition. The spacing between words varies in ways that suggest the writer was copying rather than composing. She produced enlarged photographs showing the differences. In my professional opinion, these letters are forgeries. Skillful forgeries but forgeries nonetheless. Brandon's attorney attempted to challenge her findings, but made little headway against her expertise and certainty. The morning session ended with the judge calling a 2-hour recess for lunch. Lily stepped outside the courthouse into air that felt cleaner than anything she had breathed in hours. The tension of the courtroom had been suffocating. Now standing in Wyoming sunlight, she could finally think. Frank appeared at her side. "You did well in there. Your grandmother would have been proud." Lily wanted to believe him, but the battle wasn't over. Brandon's claim might be collapsing, but Marcus Webb hadn't shown his face yet, and she knew from her father's letter that Marcus was the real enemy. "When we go back in," she said, "Marcus will make his move." Frank nodded grimly. "He's been waiting 30 years. He won't let it end without a fight." The afternoon session began with a surprise. The courtroom doors opened and Marcus Webb walked in. He was exactly as he had appeared in the photograph from 1993. Older, certainly. The dark hair had gone silver. The sharp features had softened slightly with age. But the eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, predatory. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than everything Lily owned combined. His lawyer walked beside him, equally polished, equally confident. Grace made a small sound beside Lily. The older woman's face had gone pale, her hands gripping the bench in front of her with white-knuckled intensity. This was the man who had destroyed her family, the ghost she had been chasing for 20 years. Walking into the courtroom like he owned it. "Your Honor," Marcus Webb's attorney announced, "my client wishes to file an intervention claim under Wyoming Statute 34-2-109. Judge Morningstar's expression sharpened. "On what grounds?" "Pre-existing creditor status. My client holds documentation of a $50,000 loan made to Robert Carter in 2010 with Dawson Ranch listed as collateral. The debt was never repaid. Mr. Webb is requesting recognition as a secured creditor with superior claim to the estate." The judge turned to David Reynolds. "Were you aware of this claim, Counselor?" "We were informed yesterday, Your Honor. We believe the claim is fraudulent, consistent with a pattern of behavior Mr. Webb has exhibited for over 30 years. Those are serious allegations. We have evidence to support them." Judge Morningstar looked at Marcus Webb with an expression that suggested she had seen men like him before and found them uniformly disappointing. "Mr. Webb, you may take the stand." Marcus walked to the witness box with the unhurried confidence of a man who had done this many times before. His oath was delivered smoothly, without the hesitation Brandon had shown. His attorney led him through the basics of his claim. "I knew Eleanor Dawson for over 40 years. In 1993, we discussed marriage. I invested significantly in the ranch during those years. When Robert Carter approached me in 2010 requesting financial assistance, I provided a $50,000 loan based on my long relationship with the family." "And was this loan repaid?" Marcus's expression shifted to something that might have been sorrow if it had reached his eyes. "Unfortunately, no. Robert died before fulfilling his obligation. I approached Eleanor about the debt, but she was consumed by grief. I chose to give her time rather than pursue legal action. When she passed, I realized I could no longer delay asserting my legitimate claim." David Reynolds rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Webb, you mentioned your relationship with Eleanor Dawson spanned 40 years. Can you describe the nature of that relationship?" "We were close friends, confidants. At one point, something more. You proposed marriage to her in 1993. Marcus's mask flickered almost imperceptibly. "I did, and she rejected you. She felt we were better as friends." David pulled a photograph from his folder, the same image Lily had found in Eleanor's files. "Do you recognize this photograph?" Marcus studied it with carefully controlled expression. "That appears to be Eleanor and myself, yes." On the back of this photograph, Eleanor wrote the words, "Marcus Webb, 1993. Never trust this man. Does that sound like the description of a close friend?" Brandon's attorney objected. Speculation. The response was overruled. David pressed forward. "Mr. Webb, are you familiar with Grace Sullivan?" Marcus's eyes darted to Grace, seated in the gallery. Something passed across his face. Recognition, and perhaps a trace of concern. "The name sounds familiar. In 1998, you posed as an irrigation consultant and defrauded her family of $30,000. Her father died of a heart attack 6 months later. The ranch was foreclosed." Marcus's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." David produced a stack of documents. "I have records from 6 other families across Wyoming who lost property or money to schemes matching your methodology. Forged documents, fake credentials, promises of services that were never delivered." He laid the documents on the judge's bench. "Marcus Webb has been running variations of this con for over 30 years. He targets vulnerable families. He gains their trust. He takes what he wants and disappears before anyone can stop him. Judge Morningstar examined the documents with growing concern. Mr. Webb, do you have a response to these allegations? Marcus's composure was beginning to crack. The smooth confidence that had carried him through countless cons was meeting resistance it hadn't expected. These are lies, fabrications designed to discredit a legitimate creditor claim. David called his next witness. The forensic document examiner returned to the stand, this time to discuss the IOU that formed the basis of Marcus's claim. I examined the original document provided by Mr. Webb. The loan amount shows clear signs of alteration. She produced magnified images. The original figure was $20,000. Someone used a different pen and different pressure to change the 2 to a 5, creating $50,000. The ink analysis confirms the alteration was made at a different time than the original document was created. The courtroom stirred. Judge Morningstar made rapid notes. In addition, I compared the signature on this IOU to authenticated samples of Robert Carter's handwriting. While the signature is genuine, there are indications that portions of the document above the signature were added after signing. She looked directly at Marcus Webb. In my professional opinion, Robert Carter signed an IOU for $20,000. Someone altered the document after his death to inflate the claimed debt. Marcus was on his feet before his attorney could stop him. That's a lie. Robert Carter owed me every penny. He came to me desperate, begging for help. I saved his family's ranch, and this is how I'm repaid. Mr. Webb, the judge's voice cut through his outburst. Control yourself. But Marcus was beyond control now. 30 years of patient scheming had led to this moment, and it was falling apart in front of his eyes. Eleanor stole 30 years from me. She promised me that ranch when she rejected my proposal. Said I would always have a place there. Said I was family. And then she gave everything to 2 orphan girls who never even knew her name. The mask had shattered completely. Your father was a drunk and a failure. He thought throwing money at me would make me forget what I was owed. He was wrong, and now his daughters think they can waltz in here and take what belongs to me. Judge Morningstar slammed her gavel. Mr. Webb, you will be silent or you will be removed from this courtroom. Marcus's attorney grabbed his arm trying to pull him back to his seat, but the dam had broken. That ranch is mine. I earned it. I invested 40 years in that family. Eleanor led me on. Robert thought he could buy me off. They were both wrong, and I will not let 2 foster children steal my inheritance. The word hit Lily like a physical blow. His inheritance. This wasn't about a debt. It had never been about a debt. Marcus Webb believed he deserved Dawson Ranch because Eleanor had rejected him 30 years ago. He had constructed an entire worldview around the idea that her refusal entitled him to everything she had. He was insane. Not clinically, perhaps, but morally. A man so consumed by entitlement that he had spent 3 decades destroying families to punish a woman who had simply said no. Judge Morningstar's voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Webb, I am issuing an immediate injunction halting all claims against the Dawson estate pending investigation of these fraud allegations. You are prohibited from contacting either Miss Carter or any representative of the estate. Her gavel struck with finality. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Based on the evidence presented today, there is substantial reason to believe that Mr. Webb has engaged in a pattern of fraud extending over 3 decades. Deputies moved toward Marcus. This court will schedule a full evidentiary hearing within 10 days. Until then, Brandon Hayes' claim is suspended and Lily Carter is granted provisional access to Dawson Ranch as the named beneficiary of Eleanor Dawson's will. The gavel struck again. Court is adjourned. The aftermath felt surreal. Lily stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by people who had fought beside her, watching deputies escort Marcus Webb toward a waiting patrol car. The man who had haunted her family for 30 years was finally facing consequences. But something was wrong. She could see it in the set of Marcus's shoulders as he was led away, in the cold smile he threw over his shoulder, in the way his eyes found hers across the courthouse lawn. This isn't over. She didn't hear him speak the words, but she saw them on his lips, a promise, a threat. Marcus Webb had been running cons for 30 years without getting caught. He had escaped justice in 6 different counties. He had destroyed families and walked away without consequence. He wasn't going to let a preliminary hearing stop him now. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of legal paperwork and cautious celebration. On the first day after the hearing, David Reynolds secured an emergency court order granting access to Eleanor's safety deposit box. The document had to be signed by 3 different officials and notarized twice, but by late afternoon they were standing in the vault of Silver Creek Community Bank. The bank manager, a woman named Patricia who had known Eleanor for 4 decades, led them to box 247. Her hands trembled slightly as she inserted the bank's key alongside Frank's. Eleanor told me this box held the most important documents in her life. She came here twice a year to check on it, never removed anything, just looked, like she was making sure it was all still there. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside, layers of history waited to be discovered. On top, backup copies of Eleanor's will. Multiple versions spanning 3 decades, each one naming Robert Carter as primary beneficiary until the most recent, which named Lily Marie Carter and her sister Mia. Beneath the wills, Robert's birth certificate, baby photos that Lily had never seen, images of her father as an infant, as a toddler, as a boy learning to ride his first horse on land that had belonged to his family for generations. She traced his face with her fingertip, the same eyes she saw in the mirror every morning, the same stubborn set to his jaw that Mia had inherited. Deeper in the box, the documents that would change everything. A bank cashier's check receipt dated July 29, 2011, $50,000 paid to Marcus Webb. The memo line read, "Final payment, IOU satisfaction." Stapled to the receipt, the original IOU, not the altered version Marcus had presented in court, but the real document. $20,000, clearly written in Robert's hand and stamped across it in red ink. Paid in full. Frank made a sound like he had been struck. Robert paid him. Every penny. And Marcus altered the document after Robert's death. Lily's voice was steady despite the emotions churning in her chest. Changed 20 to 50. Tried to triple his profit. But the proof that destroyed Marcus's claim was the letter beneath the receipt. Eleanor's handwriting, shaky but clear, dated August 2011. Robert paid this snake every penny the day before he died. Marcus called me 3 days after the funeral demanding more. Said Robert had promised him the ranch as additional compensation. Said I had promised it to him in 1993 when I refused to marry him. Lies. Marcus Webb proposed it to me in 1993. I refused because I could see he wanted my property deed more than he wanted me. He has been circling this ranch for 30 years, using my son's desperation to claim what was never his. If Marcus ever returns, show him these documents. He has no claim. Robert died debt-free. My granddaughters will inherit clean. Protect Lily and Mia from this man. Eleanor Margaret Dawson. Lily held the letter against her chest. Her grandmother had known this day would come, had prepared for it across decades, had loved her granddaughters enough to build a fortress of documentation around their inheritance, even if she had been too afraid to love them in person. David Reynolds photographed everything and filed copies with the court that same afternoon. Frank changed the locks at Dawson Ranch and installed new security measures. Grace organized a cleaning party to remove every trace of Brandon Hayes' occupation. Lily and Mia walked through their grandmother's house for the first time as its rightful owners. The experience was bittersweet. So many empty spaces where heirlooms should have stood. So many walls stripped of photographs that could never be recovered. Brandon had taken more than objects. He had taken pieces of Eleanor's history, pieces of the family story that Lily would never know. But the house itself remained. The kitchen where Eleanor had cooked for 60 years. The study where she had managed the business of 800 hectares. The bedroom where she had slept beside her husband until his death, and then alone for decades after. And the cellar, still sealed, still waiting. Frank had cut the locks Brandon had added, but the original lock remained. Rusted, ancient, holding secrets that had been buried since 1995. We need to open it, Lily said. Frank nodded. But not until we know we're safe. Marcus Webb is in custody, but he has money and lawyers and connections. Until he's behind bars permanently, we stay vigilant. On the third night after the hearing, the phone rang. It was David Reynolds. Lily, I have bad news. Marcus Webb posted bail this afternoon. His lawyer found a bondsman willing to take the risk for a premium. He's out. Lily felt the floor drop beneath her. That's impossible. The judge denied bail. His attorney filed an appeal. Different judge. Different jurisdiction. The new judge didn't have all the information about Marcus's flight risk. What does this mean? It means Marcus Webb is free. And given his history, I don't expect him to wait around for trial. Lily thanked the attorney and ended the call. Frank and Grace were watching her, reading the news in her expression before she spoke. He's out. The words dropped into the quiet kitchen like stones into still water. Grace's face went pale. That's not possible. He was supposed to stay locked up. His lawyer found a way. Frank was already moving toward the window, his military instincts engaging. If Marcus is free, he's dangerous. He just lost everything in that courtroom. His reputation, his scheme, his chance at the ranch. A man like that doesn't accept defeat. What do we do? Frank turned to face her. We prepare, we fortify, and we don't let our guard down for a second. The knock came at 10 o'clock that night. Lily was in the kitchen with Frank, reviewing security measures, when the sound echoed through the house. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Frank's hand moved to the rifle he had placed within reach. Stay here. He moved toward the door with the silent efficiency of a man who had done this kind of thing in far more dangerous places than Wyoming. Lily watched from the kitchen doorway as he checked the window beside the entrance. His posture changed, tensed, then shifted to something like confusion. It's Brandon Hayes. What? He's alone, hands raised. Frank opened the door with the rifle clearly visible. Brandon stood on the porch, looking worse than Lily had ever seen him. Unshaven, exhausted, eyes red from what might have been crying or drinking or both. His voice cracked when he spoke. I need to talk to you, please. It's important. Give me one reason not to call the sheriff. Because Marcus Webb is coming here tonight, and he's not coming alone. Lily stepped into the doorway. Brandon's eyes found hers. The contempt that had filled them in the feed store was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. I know you have no reason to believe me. I know I've done terrible things, but I'm not a murderer, and what Marcus is planning is murder. Frank's rifle didn't waver. Keep talking. Brandon's story poured out in fragments. Marcus had contacted him from jail, had given him instructions for what to do if the court case went wrong, had planned for every contingency, including this one. He wants to burn the house down, destroy all the evidence, force you out of the property. He's got 2 men coming with him. They've done this kind of thing before. Why are you telling us this? Brandon's jaw tightened. My mother died in a house fire when I was 8. My father's business partner set it to cover up insurance fraud. I was supposed to be in that house. Would have been if I hadn't snuck out to meet friends. His voice broke. I've done a lot of terrible things in my life. Stolen from people. Lied. Cheated. But I will not be part of killing children. I can't. That's a line I won't cross. Lily studied his face, looking for the deception that had defined every interaction she'd had with this man. She found only exhaustion, and perhaps the faint beginning of redemption. When? Brandon checked his phone. 2 hours, maybe less. He's waiting until everyone in town is asleep. Lily turned to Frank. Get Grace. Wake Mia. We need to plan. The next 90 minutes were the most intense of Lily's life. Frank transformed from grieving father to combat veteran. He mapped out defensive positions, assigned roles, explained what would happen and what everyone needed to do. Mia would leave with Grace. Non-negotiable. The girl protested, but Lily held firm. This isn't about being brave, it's about being smart. I need to know you're safe so I can focus on what's coming. Mia's tears soaked Lily's shirt as they hugged. Promise you'll come back. Lily kissed her sister's forehead. 60 more years, I promise. Grace's truck disappeared down the driveway, taillights fading into the darkness. Lily watched until she couldn't see them anymore. Then she turned back to face the house. Frank had positioned himself in the barn loft. High ground, clear sight lines across the yard. He communicated through the 2-way radios that had served them well before. Brandon, despite everything, had chosen to stay. Had chosen to help defend a property he had tried to steal, perhaps seeking redemption, perhaps simply trying to balance a cosmic ledger that had been tilted wrong for too long. Lily sat on the front porch with a rifle across her knees. The weapon felt strange in her hands. She had never fired a gun before coming to Wyoming, had never imagined she would need to. But Frank had trained her over the past week, had shown her how to aim, how to squeeze rather than pull the trigger, how to stay calm when everything inside was screaming to run. She waited. The Wyoming night stretched around her, dark and vast and filled with stars. The same stars that had watched over this land for thousands of years. The same stars her grandmother had loved. Somewhere out there, Marcus Webb was coming. 30 years of hatred focused into a single night of violence. Lily tightened her grip on the rifle. Her father had died trying to protect his family from this man. Her grandmother had spent 3 decades keeping secrets to shield her granddaughters from this threat. Now it was Lily's turn to fight, and she would not fail. The hours crept by slowly. 11 o'clock, 11:30. Midnight approached with the inevitability of a tide. Lily sat in the darkness, the rifle heavy across her knees, watching shadows move across the yard. Every sound seemed amplified. the creak of the house settling, the wind moving through the cottonwoods, the distant call of a coyote. She thought about her father. Robert Carter had sat on this same porch, probably in this same chair, looking out at the same stars. He had grown up here, had learned to ride horses and mend fences and read the weather in the clouds, had left because of a fight with his mother and returned because of love for his daughters. He had died trying to protect them from the man who was coming tonight. Lily wondered what he would think if he could see her now. His daughter, 17 years old, sitting in the darkness with a rifle waiting for a confrontation that could end in violence. She hoped he would be proud. She hoped he would understand that some things were worth fighting for, that the land he had grown up on, the legacy his mother had protected for 60 years, the home his daughters had finally found was worth whatever price had to be paid. The radio crackled, Frank's voice barely above a whisper. Movement on the North Ridge, 2 vehicles approaching with lights off. Lily's heart rate spiked, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. This was it. Marcus Webb was coming, and this time he would face someone who wasn't going to run. The headlights appeared first, 2 sets moving slowly through the darkness, following the ranch road that led to the main house. They flickered through the trees like predator eyes, growing larger and brighter as they approached. Lily stood. The rifle came up to her shoulder, the stock solid against her cheek, the barrel pointed toward the driveway where the vehicles would emerge. 30 years of hatred and obsession were about to meet 17 years of survival and determination. Only one would walk away. The headlights died 100 yards from the house. 2 vehicles, dark shapes against the darker landscape, engines cutting to silence one after the other, doors opening with careful precision, the sounds muffled by distance but unmistakable in the stillness of the Wyoming night. The moon hung low on the horizon, casting silver light across the yard. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound seemed amplified. The ranch that had been peaceful hours ago now felt like a battlefield waiting for the first shot. Lily counted the figures emerging from the vehicles. 3 men. 1 moved with the authority of command. 2 followed with the posture of hired muscle, men who had done violence for money before and would do it again without hesitation. Marcus Webb had come to finish what he started 30 years ago. Frank's voice crackled through the radio, barely above a whisper. 3 targets confirmed. Lead figure moving toward the house, 2 flanking, they're carrying containers. Red plastic, 5-gallon capacity, enough accelerant to burn this place to the ground. Gasoline, just as Brandon had warned. Lily steadied her breathing. The rifle felt like an extension of her arms now, as natural as her own hands. 10 days of training compressed into this single moment. Every lesson Frank had taught her, every warning he had issued, every technique he had drilled into her muscle memory. This was what it had all been preparing for. She thought of Mia somewhere safe with Grace, of the promise she had made, 60 more years, of the sister who had trusted her to come back. She thought of her father, Robert Carter, the man who had died on a mountain road because he dared to stand up to the monster now walking across the yard. She thought of her grandmother, Eleanor Dawson, the woman who had spent 30 years preparing for this night, who had built fortresses of documentation and sealed cellars of secrets, who had loved her granddaughters from a distance because getting close meant putting them in danger. This ends tonight. Brandon crouched beside the fence line, his position giving him a clear view of the eastern approach. He had chosen to stay, chosen to fight against the man who had corrupted him, chosen redemption over escape. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, Brandon Hayes would face the consequences of his choices, the good ones and the bad ones, the years of theft and lies, in the single night when he chose to protect children instead of profit. The figures moved across the yard with practiced efficiency. They had done this before, burned buildings, destroyed evidence, eliminated problems that couldn't be solved through courts and lawyers. Their movements were professional, military almost, the kind of coordinated approach that suggested training and experience. These weren't amateurs playing criminal. These were men who had made careers out of violence. Marcus Webb walked at the center of the formation. Even in the darkness, Lily could recognize his posture, the arrogance of a man who believed the world owed him something and would burn it down before accepting otherwise. His silver hair caught the moonlight. His expensive clothes looked out of place against the rustic backdrop of the ranch. A predator dressed for the city, hunting on ground that belonged to people who worked with their hands. He stopped 30 feet from the porch. "I know you're there, girl," his voice carried across the distance, smooth and confident. "Saw the glint of your rifle barrel in the moonlight. Not as clever as you think. Lily didn't respond, didn't move, let the silence stretch. Marcus laughed. The sound held no warmth. Your grandmother tried to outsmart me too. Spent 30 years building walls and hiding documents. Thought she could keep me away forever. Look how that worked out. One of his men moved toward the porch steps, a red container sloshing in his grip. The smell of gasoline reached Lily's nose, sharp, dangerous, the scent of destruction waiting to happen. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the night, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the yard. The bullet struck the ground 3 feet from the man's boots, sending up a spray of dirt and gravel. He froze. That was a warning. Lily's voice came out steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The next one won't be. Marcus didn't flinch. If anything, his smile widened. Brave girl. Just like Eleanor was brave. Just like your father was brave. He stepped closer, hands spread in mock surrender. But bravery doesn't stop bullets. And you're outnumbered 3-1. His men began to spread out, moving to flank positions that would make defense impossible. Professional movements. They had done this before. Frank's voice came through the radio, single click, move to exit position. But Lily held her ground. Something in Marcus's confidence felt wrong, too theatrical, too certain. Then she understood. He was stalling, waiting for his men to circle behind the house, to cut off her escape, to trap her in a crossfire she couldn't survive. She was about to call Frank's bluff when headlights exploded from the direction of the main road. Not one vehicle. 2, 3. Sirens screaming, red and blue lights painting the landscape in strobing chaos. Marcus's face transformed. The smooth confidence shattered, replaced by raw fury and disbelief. No, that's not possible. Brandon had called the sheriff. Not just called. He had provided detailed information about Marcus's plan, his accomplices, his history of arson and fraud across multiple states. He had handed over every piece of evidence he had accumulated during their partnership. Redemption sometimes came at the price of betrayal, and Brandon Hayes had chosen to betray the monster instead of the children. The deputies spread across the yard with weapons drawn and voices commanding. Everyone on the ground, now! Marcus's hired men dropped their containers and raised their hands. Professionals recognized when a situation had turned. They weren't getting paid enough to die in a Wyoming ranch yard. But Marcus Webb wasn't a professional. He was an obsession given human form. 30 years of hatred concentrated into a single moment of absolute refusal. He pulled a lighter from his pocket. The yard went silent. Even the deputies froze, calculating distances and trajectories, wondering if they could reach him before he could flick the wheel. Marcus held the lighter high, his thumb on the striker. If I can't have this ranch, no one will. Eleanor understood that in the end. That's why she sealed that cellar. She knew I would come back, knew I would burn everything to the ground rather than let it go. His eyes found Lily's across the chaos of lights and weapons. Your father understood too. That's why he died. He thought he could pay me off and make me disappear. He was wrong. Some debts can only be paid in blood. The words hit Lily like a physical blow. Her father's death, not an accident, not bad luck on a mountain road. Murder, dressed up to look like tragedy. You killed him. Marcus's smile returned, cruel and satisfied. He walked away from our meeting that Saturday, thought it was over, thought he had won. He was halfway down the mountain when his brakes stopped working. Amazing how easy it is to cut brake lines in the dark. The confession hung in the air, witnessed by deputies, recorded by body cameras, preserved forever. Something shifted in Lily's chest, the grief she had carried for 8 years, the questions that had never been answered, the lingering suspicion that her father's death had been too convenient, too perfectly timed. Now she knew. And now Marcus Webb would pay. Put the lighter down. The voice came from behind Marcus, rough with age, trembling with decades of accumulated fury. Grace Sullivan stepped out of the shadows. She held a shotgun that looked older than anyone in the yard, a weapon that had probably belonged to her father, that had probably hung above the fireplace in a ranch that no longer existed because of the man standing in front of her. 20 years, her voice cracked with emotion. 20 years I've been looking for you, Marcus Webb. 20 years of watching my father's grave and wondering if you even remembered the family you destroyed. Marcus's smile faltered. Grace! His voice carried surprise and something that might have been fear. That was a long time ago. You stole everything from us. Our land, our future, my father's life. Grace's hands were steady on the shotgun despite the tears streaming down her face. He died of a broken heart because he trusted you, because you smiled and promised and took everything we had. The deputies were frozen, uncertain. The situation had spiraled beyond standard protocols. I've imagined this moment every day for 20 years. Imagined what I would say, what I would do, whether I could pull the trigger and feel satisfaction or just more emptiness. Her finger tightened on the trigger guard. But you know what I realized? Killing you won't bring my father back, won't restore our ranch, won't undo any of the pain you caused. She lowered the shotgun slightly. But watching you rot in prison for the rest of your miserable life, watching you grow old behind bars knowing that everything you schemed for was lost, that's worth more than a bullet. Grace turned to the nearest deputy. I want to make a formal statement about 1998, about the fraud that killed my family's ranch and my father. I want every charge that can be filed against this man filed tonight. The deputy nodded, moved toward Grace with handcuffs for Marcus. But Marcus Webb wasn't finished. He flicked the lighter. The flame caught, orange and hungry, dancing in the night air. Lily fired, not at Marcus. At the red container, one of his men had dropped 6 feet away. The container that was leaking gasoline into the dirt. The container that would explode if Marcus dropped that lighter. The bullet punched through the plastic, sending a geyser of fuel into the air away from the house. The gasoline spread across the yard in the opposite direction from any structure. Marcus stared at the ruined container, at the lighter in his hand, at the impossibility of his plan collapsing around him. Then he ran, toward the cellar, the sealed cellar that had been locked since 1995, that Eleanor had protected with multiple locks and warnings. That contained secrets Marcus had been willing to burn the entire ranch to destroy. Stop! Deputies gave chase. Frank emerged from the barn loft, moving with a speed that belied his age. Brandon appeared from his position near the fence line, cutting off Marcus's escape route. Marcus reached the cellar doors just as 3 deputies tackled him. The impact drove him into the wood and metal. The ancient lock that had held for 3 decades shattered under the combined weight of 4 bodies. The doors burst open, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Marcus fell. His scream echoed up from the depths, sharp, and sudden, and then silent. A deputy's flashlight illuminated the scene. Marcus Webb lay at the bottom of the stairs, his leg bent at an angle that no leg should bend, his face contorted in pain, his hands reaching for something that wasn't there. The cellar held him prisoner now, the same cellar he had been trying to destroy, the same cellar that contained the truth about why Eleanor had sealed it 30 years ago. Paramedics arrived as dawn broke over the Wyoming mountains. They stabilized Marcus's leg, strapped him to a stretcher, and loaded him into an ambulance that would take him to a hospital where he would be treated for his injuries and then transferred to a jail cell where he would await trial for murder, arson conspiracy, and 3 decades of fraud across multiple states. His accomplices were already in custody. Their statements would add to the mountain of evidence. Their cooperation agreements would seal Marcus's fate. Brandon Hayes sat in the back of a deputy's cruiser, hands cuffed, face showing the exhausted relief of someone who had finally made a choice he could live with. Through the window, he caught Lily's eye. She nodded once. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness, but recognition that in the end, he had chosen to be something other than what Marcus had made him. The deputy drove him away toward a future that would include prison time, but also the possibility of redemption, of becoming the person he might have been if he had never met Marcus Webb. The sun climbed higher. The chaos faded into the calm of aftermath. Deputies secured the scene. Investigators photographed evidence. The ranch that had been a battlefield transformed back into what it had always been: land, legacy, home. Frank appeared at Lily's side. It's over. Lily looked at the cellar. The doors that had been sealed for 30 years now stood open, revealing stone steps and darkness and answers that had been waiting 3 decades to be found. Not quite. She walked toward the opening. Frank followed without question. The cellar smelled of earth and time and secrets too old to remember their own origins. Lily descended carefully, her phone's flashlight cutting through darkness that had been absolute since 1995. The walls were stone, weeping moisture from decades of being sealed away from light and air. The floor was packed dirt, hard as concrete from years of compression. Each step felt significant, sacred almost. She was walking into a space her grandmother had protected for 30 years. A space her father had fought about and left because of. A space that Marcus Webb had been willing to burn the entire ranch to destroy. Frank followed closer behind, his presence steady and reassuring. The old soldier had seen worse places. had descended into darkness in countries far from Wyoming, had faced enemies more dangerous than the secrets waiting at the bottom of these stairs. But even he seemed to feel the weight of the moment, the sense that they were about to discover something that would change everything they thought they knew. Wooden shelves lined 3 walls. Each shelf held leather-bound journals organized by year. Eleanor's handwriting labeled each spine with the careful precision of someone who understood that records were a form of immortality. Dawson Ranch Log, 1965 to 1970, and onward through decades. Documentation of daily ranch life rendered in meticulous detail. Lily pulled one volume at random. 1987, the year her father would have been 18. The year he probably started thinking about leaving. The entries described weather patterns and cattle prices and equipment repairs. But scattered between the practical notations were personal observations, worries about Robert, pride in his accomplishments, fear that the ranch wasn't big enough to hold his ambitions. Eleanor had been a mother even in her record-keeping, had documented her son's life alongside the life of the land. But it wasn't the journals that drew Lily's attention. It was the iron safe built into the stone wall. A combination lock gleamed despite the cellar's general decay. A note taped to its surface, faded but legible, bore Eleanor's handwriting. Combination. Lily's birthday plus Maya's birthday. I knew you would open this together. Grandma. Lily's hands trembled as she approached the safe. She spun the dial with careful precision. 071532. Her birthday in July. Mia's in March. Numbers their grandmother had known, had remembered, had used as the key to whatever final secret waited inside. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside, the original Dawson Ranch deed dated 1872, signed by Jeremiah Dawson in ink that had faded to sepia. A land grant from the United States government, 800 hectares carved from Wyoming territory when the frontier was still bleeding and lawless. Beneath the deed, a letter in script that predated typewriters. To my descendants, I came to Wyoming with nothing but determination and a horse that went lame in Montana. Built this ranch with my hands. Proved that hard work matters more than privilege. 800 hectares of freedom. Protect it from those who take the easy path. Pass it to those who will cherish it, not those who will sell it for quick profit. Jeremiah Dawson, 1890. The words of a man dead for over a century, speaking across time to the granddaughter who would fulfill his wishes. But beneath the historical documents lay something more personal. A wooden box, small, worn, the kind of box that held treasures too precious to display. Lily opened it with reverent care. $15,000 in worn bills, rubber banded in stacks. Emergency funds Eleanor had hidden against the possibility that her granddaughters might need resources the legal system couldn't provide quickly enough. And beneath the money, an envelope, unsealed, unaddressed, bearing her father's handwriting and a date that stopped Lily's heart. July 28th, 2011, 2 days before he died. Frank's hand found her shoulder, steadying, grounding. She opened the envelope. Lily, my beautiful girl. If you're reading this, it means I didn't come home from my meeting with Marcus Webb. It means everything I feared has happened. It means you and Mia are alone in ways I never wanted you to be. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for the drinking, the years I wasted trying to drown sorrows that only got deeper the more I drank. I'm sorry for the distance between me and your grandmother, for leaving this place when I was young and stubborn and too proud to admit I was wrong. I'm sorry for the debt I created that gave Marcus leverage over our family. I'm sorry I won't be there to watch you grow up, to see Mia learn to read, to walk you down the aisle someday, to hold my grandchildren in arms that should have decades left to offer. But I'm not sorry for what I'm about to do. Marcus Webb has been hunting our family for 30 years. He proposed to your grandmother in 1993, and when she said no, he decided that everything we had should belong to him. He's patient. He's ruthless. He's spent 3 decades waiting for his moment. I paid him back every penny I owed, every single cent. But he wants more. He wants the ranch. He wants to destroy what Eleanor built. He wants to punish her through her children and grandchildren. I'm meeting him tomorrow to tell him it's over, that he has no claim, that the debt is clear and he needs to disappear. He won't like that. Men like Marcus Webb don't accept defeat. They don't walk away. They destroy what they can't possess. If I don't come back, it's because he found a way to stop me. And if that happens, you need to know something. You are stronger than I ever was. You have your grandmother's eyes and your mother's kindness in something that belongs only to you. A fire that no one can extinguish. A determination that no obstacle can stop. I've watched you from the day you were born. Watched you protect your sister with a fierceness that amazed me. Watched you face challenges that would break most adults and come out stronger every time. You are the best thing I ever did with my life, you and Mia, the only things I got right. Protect each other, protect this land, and don't let anyone ever tell you that you don't deserve to be here. This ranch is yours, by blood, by right, by the simple truth that you're the one willing to fight for it. I love you, Lily. I love Mia. I love your mother, who I'll see again soon. Be brave, be strong, be everything I know you already are. Your father, Robert. Lily read the letter 3 times. Each reading peeled away another layer of grief, replaced it with something harder, something that felt like steel being forged in a furnace of loss and love. Her father had known he might die, had written this letter just in case, had hidden it in a place only his mother would know, trusting that somehow, someday, it would reach his daughter. And it had. 8 years too late, but not too late to matter. Frank read the letter over her shoulder. When he finished, his voice was rough with emotion. Robert was a better man than anyone gave him credit for. Lily nodded, unable to speak. She folded the letter carefully, slipped it into her pocket, against her heart, where it would stay. Then she climbed out of the cellar into Wyoming sunlight and went to find her sister. Grace had called during the chaos of the arrest, had heard sirens and feared the worst, had spent an hour driving back with Mia, both of them frantic with worry. When they pulled up to the ranch, Lily was waiting on the porch. Mia launched herself from the truck before it fully stopped. Her small body collided with Lily's hard enough to knock them both backward. Her arms wrapped tight. Her tears soaked Lily's already ruined shirt. You promised you'd come back. Lily held her sister with fierce gratitude, breathed in the familiar scent of cheap shampoo and Wyoming dust. 60 more years, remember? The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and media attention. Marcus Webb's confession to murder, recorded on multiple body cameras, made national news. The story of a 30-year vendetta, the foster children who fought back, the small-town allies who helped them win. Reporters descended on Silver Creek, asked questions Lily refused to answer, took photographs she couldn't prevent, wrote stories that got some details right and others completely wrong. Through it all, Frank stood guard at the ranch gate, turned away anyone without a legitimate reason to be there, protected the family that had become his own. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Marcus Webb, represented by expensive lawyers paid for by assets that were rapidly being frozen, mounted every defense available. Temporary insanity, coercion, fabricated evidence. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree for the death of Robert Carter. Conspiracy to commit arson, fraud, forgery. The charges stacked like bricks, building a wall that would keep Marcus Webb in prison for the rest of his life. 32 years without possibility of parole. Grace wept in the courtroom when the sentence was read. 20 years of grief and fury finally finding an ending. Not the revenge she had once imagined, but something better. Justice. The knowledge that the man who had destroyed her family would never destroy another. Lily felt something release in her chest, a tension she hadn't known she was carrying, the constant vigilance of living under threat, the fear that Marcus would somehow escape consequences again. It was over, really, truly, finally over. 18 months later, the sun rose over Dawson Ranch with the slow inevitability of all Wyoming mornings. Orange light spilled across pastures where 75 head of red Angus cattle grazed on grass that had fed generations of their ancestors. The sky shifted from purple to pink to gold as Lily watched from the porch. Coffee steam rose from her mug, curling in the crisp morning air. Birds called from the cottonwood trees. In the distance, a rooster announced the day with the same authority his predecessors had used for 100 years. This was her favorite time. The quiet hour before the ranch woke up, before the work began, before the 1,000 small tasks of running 800 hectares demanded her attention. She had earned this peace, bought it with blood and tears and more courage than she had known she possessed. Lily stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the world wake up. She was 19 now. Her hands bore calluses from months of real work, the soft skin of a foster child replaced by the rough palms of a rancher. Her eyes carried a confidence that came from facing the worst and surviving. Her posture had changed, straightened, settled into the stance of someone who belonged exactly where she stood. She had grown into herself here, into the woman her grandmother had believed she could become, into the daughter her father had seen when he wrote that final letter. The ranch had transformed around her. Fences that had sagged now stood straight and strong, the posts replaced with treated lumber that would last another 50 years. Equipment that had languished in various states of disrepair received proper maintenance, the tractor purring smoothly now instead of coughing and dying mid-field. Pastures that had been neglected during Brandon's occupation returned to productivity under the guidance of Frank Mitchell, who had become the grandfather neither she nor Mia had ever known. The cattle operation had expanded under their management. They had purchased 20 additional head from Bill Carter at a price that reflected friendship more than market value, had improved breeding stock through careful selection, had negotiated contracts with buyers in Cheyenne that guaranteed prices regardless of market fluctuations. Eleanor would have been proud. Frank said it at least once a week, and each time Lily believed it a little more. The house had changed too. Photographs lined the walls again. Not Eleanor's originals, which Brandon had sold to strangers who didn't understand their value, but new ones. Pictures of Lily and Maya learning to ride horses on the same ground their father had learned. Pictures of Frank teaching them to rope, his patience infinite, his criticism rare. Pictures of Grace sharing Sunday dinners, her laughter filling rooms that had been silent for too long. A family assembled from broken pieces, stronger for having been rebuilt. Mia's bedroom was painted yellow, the color she had dreamed about for 6 years of foster homes. The color that meant safety and warmth in a place that could not be taken away. She had chosen it herself, spent 3 days applying it with more enthusiasm than skill, and refused to change a single imperfect brushstroke. It was hers. The imperfections only made it more so. The screen door creaked behind Lily. Mia emerged, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, wearing pajamas covered in cartoon horses. At 12, she had grown 4 inches and lost the haunted look that had followed her through foster care. She smiled now, laughed, raced across pastures with the abandon of a child who finally felt safe. "Emmy, is Frank making pancakes?" Lily smiled at her sister. "Does Frank ever not make pancakes on Saturday?" Mia grinned and disappeared toward the kitchen, where the smell of bacon and coffee promised the kind of breakfast their father had probably eaten as a boy in this same house. Grace's truck appeared on the ranch road at 7:30, right on schedule for Sunday dinner preparation that somehow required 6 hours of work. The older woman had found peace in the months since Marcus Webb's conviction, 32 years without possibility of parole, long enough that he would die behind bars, counting the days until a freedom that would never come. It wasn't revenge, Grace had said. It was justice. And justice, I discovered, tastes a lot better than revenge ever could. She had become a fixture at Dawson Ranch, not living there, but present often enough that her absence felt strange. She brought wisdom and recipes and stories about Eleanor that filled gaps in the family history Lily was still learning. Frank emerged from the barn as Grace's truck pulled up, wiping his hands on a rag that had probably been clean once but now served as a permanent accessory. He had moved into the foreman's cabin, the small structure he had built with Eleanor's permission 30 years ago. The place where he had grieved his son and found purpose in protecting someone else's daughters. The ranch had healed him too, not completely. The grief for David would never fully fade, but it had softened into something he could carry, something that lived alongside the pride he felt watching Lily and Mia learn the skills he had spent a lifetime mastering. At noon, Brandon Hayes called from prison. The calls came monthly now, brief conversations that felt like the awkward first steps towards something neither of them could name. Brandon was serving 5 years for his role in the conspiracy. He would be out in 3 with good behavior. He had already begun planning what came after. A job in Cheyenne, an apartment that cost nothing because a cousin had offered, a chance to become someone other than Marcus Webb's puppet. Lily didn't forgive him, might never forgive him, but she accepted his calls because everyone deserved the chance to become something better than their worst decisions. Even people who had tried to steal her inheritance. Even people who had called her father a drunk and a failure. The afternoon passed in the comfortable rhythm of ranch work. Lily checked the eastern pastures with Frank, noting which sections needed rotation and which fences required repair. They discussed water levels and grass quality and the price of beef at the Riverton market. Conversations that would have meant nothing to her 18 months ago, but now felt as natural as breathing. Mia helped Grace in the kitchen, learning to make pie crust from scratch. The girls' laughter drifted through the open windows, mixing with Grace's patient instruction and the clatter of rolling pins on flour-dusted counters. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the sounds of a home that had been empty too long finally filled with life again. At sunset, Lily climbed the eastern ridge, the same ridge where Grace had first shown her the ranch. The same overlook where she had seen her inheritance for the first time and known, despite everything, that she would fight for it. The same spot where her grandmother had probably stood countless times over 60 years, watching the sun set behind mountains that had been ancient before humans ever walked this land. The climb was easier now than it had been 18 months ago. Months of ranch work had transformed her body, strengthened muscles she didn't know she had, built endurance she had never needed in foster homes. She was a different person than the girl who had stepped off that Greyhound bus with $127 and a letter from a grandmother she had never known. That girl had been desperate and scared and held together by nothing but determination and love for her sister. This woman was still held together by those things, but she had added layers, confidence, knowledge, the deep certainty that came from having been tested and not found wanting. Mia caught up with her halfway. The sisters climbed together in comfortable silence, their breathing synchronized without conscious effort, their steps matching rhythms developed over 18 months of walking this land side by side. This was what family felt like, not just shared blood, but shared experience, shared struggle, shared triumph. They reached the top as the sun touched the western mountains, orange and gold spilling across the valley like liquid fire, shadows stretching long across pastures where their cattle grazed in peaceful ignorance of all the battles that had been fought to secure their grazing rights. 800 hectares spread before them, land their great-great-grandfather had claimed when Wyoming was still territory, when the nearest law was a 3-day ride away, when survival meant fighting weather and predators and the crushing isolation of frontier life. Land their grandmother had protected for 60 years, through drought and economic collapse, through the death of her husband and the departure of her son, through decades of loneliness that must have been almost unbearable. Land their father had died trying to keep in the family, had faced down a monster and paid the ultimate price. Their land now, by blood, by law, by the simple truth that they had been willing to fight for it when giving up would have been so much easier. Mia's hand found Lily's. The girl's grip was stronger now, the soft fingers of a city child replaced by the capable hands of someone who helped with the real work, someone who could ride a horse and mend a fence and identify a sick animal from 50 yards away. "Do you think Mom and Dad can see us?" Lily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Her sister wasn't asking about theology or afterlife. She was asking about connection, about whether the people they had lost were still somehow present in their lives. "I think Dad would be relieved that we didn't repeat his mistakes, that we found a way to win where he couldn't. I think Mom would be amazed that we fought when giving up would have been so much easier." She squeezed Mia's hand. "And I think Grandma Eleanor is somewhere watching us prove she made the right choice. That leaving the ranch to 2 foster kids she'd never met wasn't crazy. It was the smartest thing she ever did." Mia leaned against her sister's side. "I'm glad we came here, even with everything bad that happened. I'm glad we didn't give up." Lily wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders. Below them, Frank emerged from the barn. Grace waved from the kitchen window. The ranch dogs chased each other across the yard. Cattle settled into their evening patterns. Smoke rose from the chimney of a house that had stood for 130 years and would stand for 100 more. "Me too, baby. Me too." They stayed on the ridge until the stars emerged. The same stars their ancestors had watched when Wyoming was wild and dangerous. The same stars their grandmother had loved. The same stars their father had grown up under before a fight with his mother drove him away. The land stretched beneath them, dark and vast and full of secrets they were still learning. Secrets about water and weather and cattle, and the 1,000 small skills that made a ranch function. Secrets about family and forgiveness and the way love could survive even 30 years of separation. Eleanor had kept them safe by staying away. Robert had died trying to protect them. Brandon had found redemption by betraying a monster. Grace had found peace by letting go of revenge. And Lily had found home by refusing to give up. The Wyoming wind moved through the cottonwoods with a sound like whispered approval. The same wind that had blown across this land for thousands of years. The same wind that would blow for thousands more. The land didn't care who owned it. It only cared who stayed. who worked, who loved it enough to sacrifice everything for the chance to belong. Lily Carter had proven she was willing, and the land, in its ancient, patient way, had accepted her. "Come on," Mia said finally. Grace made pie. Lily smiled, took one last look at the vista spread before her, at the ranch that had cost so much to claim, at the home that had been worth every moment of struggle. Then she followed her sister down the hill, toward the house, toward the family, toward the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. The screen door slammed behind them. The dogs barked their welcome. The smell of pie and coffee filled the kitchen. And somewhere, somehow, Lily knew her father was smiling. And Dawson Ranch, Wyoming. 4 generations of legacy. One family's inheritance. A story of those who stayed. A story of those who fought. A story of those who refused to let go of what mattered most. Family. Legacy. Home.